Hey guys, Creepy Fox here, reminding you that if you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe for more future Scary Stories videos. I do have a lot of videos coming for you this month of December, and I want to make sure you don't miss any of them, so do make sure to check out the channel, and also make sure to see if there's any videos you might have missed. Also, if you'd like to be part of any upcoming episodes, do make sure to send in your story with the user submissions email on screen. That's tcfnarrations@gmail.com. I am once again looking into relaunching the exclusive subscriber stories, so again, if you do have a story that you'd like to share, make sure to send it in. But with that said, let's get started, shall we? So, if my story does sound familiar, then chances are that you might have heard about this in the news lately. It is a common tactic which is used by criminals, and after you hear about how I and my husband got through it, perhaps it will teach everyone a lesson on why you have to be careful. There are just a lot of bad people out there. You don't need me to tell you that, and it's good to have this knowledge. By the way, this has actually been going on for quite some time, many years in fact, but it's only this year in 2022 that I've seen this more in the news lately. Anyway, it was the beginning of December 2016, and my husband and I are doing some Christmas shopping for our kids at the mall. We had been there for a good solid 2 hours as fellow parents looked around and shopped for gifts on their list, and Christmas music could be heard playing over the intercoms. At around 8:45 p.m., after enjoying a warm and delicious Cinnabon cinnamon roll and some milk from the mall's food court, we exited through a JCPenney's, stepped into the cold December snow, and we began our walk to the very end of the parking lot. You see, it being quite a busy evening that day, we had to park quite a ways from the mall. That and because my husband hates it when people park next to him. I can't tell you how big of a fuss he'll throw. Anyway, there were some dingy parking lot lights scattered throughout the parking lot, and amongst the cars, there is this overall feeling of peacefulness and bliss, like when you do something you're proud of and your friends and family cheer you on. I don't know, it's kind of weird to describe. I guess that's just how the snow and the night can bring you so many different emotions. Anyway, we finally reached our car, and sure enough, there is a dark blue van which was parked next to our vehicle. We couldn't see anything in there because it was nighttime, and also because the windows were quite tinted. My husband was quite upset, but I told him not to worry about it as soon as we realized our luck. There was a $20 bill on the front windshield. Was it Lady Luck? Was it someone spreading holiday magic? Well, I didn't really think much else. So as my husband is putting the gifts into the trunk, I ended up reaching for the $20 bill. But this was a big mistake. You see, almost as soon as I had done that, and I'm trying to take it off of the windshield wiper, I hear the car door next to me opening. Time then goes into slow motion, at least it seemed that way, and as I turned around, I see a masked man wearing a ski mask. He's got a knife, and I can also see a driver in the driver's seat who also has a ski mask on. "Give us your keys, and your wallet, phones, anything you have on you, and I promise you won't get hurt." Time still went into slow motion, as my thoughts are, I'm about to get stabbed. Now here's the thing with where we live, and my husband. My husband has a concealed license to carry. See where this is going? Well, I started to back up as the guy starts to get closer, not paying attention to my husband for whatever reason, and before I knew it, I hear my husband shouting obscenities and pointing his pistol at this guy. The guy ended up moving out of the way and dove back into the vehicle as a single gunshot was heard being fired from my husband's gun. The two in the vehicle stormed out of the parking lot, and I then immediately went over to my husband, crying and trying to fight off a panic attack. Some other eyewitnesses who had been walking back to their car had actually noticed what took place. It was an older couple, and they walked over to ask if we were okay. We ended up calling the police, and my husband was questioned by them quite a bit as we gave them our statement. We eventually got home, and we didn't hear anything else for a number of days. It was now a few days before Christmas, and we would learn that something similar had happened to another couple, except that time The guy with the knife had been shot in the upper arm. The police ended up catching up with the two and arresting them, and it turned out it was the same two. They had the same vehicle and all. The guy ended up surviving his injuries, but I think he and his partner learned their lesson on why you should never try mugging people, because, as you'll learn, they can fight back. So I end the submission to the Creepy Fox channel with a warning. Please be careful shopping and going out this holiday season. There are a lot of bad people out there who are looking to take advantage of you and will stop at nothing to get their way. If you do see money on your windshield, don't pick it up. Leave it be, walk away, and get help. With all those warnings said, please stay safe, everyone. Writing this story brought a huge tear to my eye. It brought back memories of my childhood and spending time with my older sister Emma. How I remember we would stay up late during the holidays, playing video games and crossing out the dates on our calendar as Christmas inched closer and closer. This scary story that I'm sharing with all of you today goes over something that happened on Christmas Eve of 1995. I myself was 8 years old at the time, and my sister was 10 years old. Anyway, my family and I had just returned from my grandparents' house and had just finished taking our showers, now sitting in the living room with some hot cocoa, watching the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Christmas special on VHS. By the way, rest in power to Jason David Frank, the Green and White Ranger. I will forever cherish the time I was able to meet him, as well as all the memories and hopes he gave to kids around the world. One of the kindest souls ever. So continuing on here, by 9:30 p.m., the Christmas special almost being over, our mom and dad reminded us that we needed to be in bed no later than 10 p.m., because otherwise Santa Claus wasn't going to bring us any gifts. You just gotta love parents, am I right? Anyway, we convinced them to allow us to watch a little bit of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie that we also had on VHS, since we wanted to watch it as well. And they said it's okay, but only the first little bit, and we could watch the rest the next morning. We agreed, and with that, my mom heads to bed. Meanwhile, my dad said he'll be back to get us once he's done taking his shower. Fast forward some minutes later, we're into the scene where Tommy and the gang are skydiving out of the airplane, all excited with smiles across our face. And all of a sudden, I could have sworn I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. I mentioned this to my sister, but she told me to be quiet and to focus on the movie. I did, and a few seconds later, a bit unnerved, I take a look past the TV set and toward the kitchen. It's just beyond the TV, but you can see the kitchen doorway entrance. No lie, I could have sworn that I saw movement in there. But how funny, because in order to get to the kitchen, you had to be in the living room and walk over there. This means I would have seen either my mom or my dad enter there. After all, my sister Emma is sitting next to me, but she was laser focused on the screen. Also, I guess technically my mom or my dad could have gone out through the front door, used the side gate, opened the back sliding door, and enter that way. That, however, was a little too much to the imagination. Anyway, speaking of imagination, I scoffed it off as that, and then continued my attention back at the screen. This wouldn't last long, however, because, I kid you not, two very tall masked men, dressed in all black, they got snow on their snow pants and boots, as well as on their gloves, and one was armed with a handgun. They ended up looking at me and my sister, and they whispered to us to be quiet and that we were going to be fine. Well, as cool as it would have been to have said, "It's morphin' time," and beat these two silly like the putties in Power Rangers, we instead screamed a bloody murder and ran toward the staircase calling for my mom and my dad. I looked back at the two intruders one last time, and all I could really see them doing was turning their backs towards us and heading back into the dark kitchen. "Mom! Dad! There's a guy with a gun! Help!" I can still clearly remember my dad yelling, "What?" with the sound of the shower hitting the tub, and my mom almost tripping over herself getting to the bedroom doorway. "Hurry up and get in here, you two," my mom would say, not even further questioning our statements. My sister and I hid inside the closet as my mom grabs a shotgun and then passes it over to my dad. We can see this through the small openings of the closet. A towel was wrapped around my dad's waist as he pumps the shotgun and tells us all to stay locked in the room. Well, can you believe my dad, bless his heart, went out into the cold and snowy 10-degree weather and tried to find the two? Well, all he was able to get was a look at the footprints in the snow as they headed into the nearby woods. Oh yeah, and he also got himself a pretty nasty cold too from going out there still half wet and barefoot. I guess the adrenaline running through his veins ended up overriding his mind. Anyway, my parents would call the police, and about 15 minutes later, they arrived and did a search of the entire neighborhood. Nothing came up, and as time seemed to pass, it would appear that this was going to be a one-time occurrence. But fast forward to the next year, just a couple of months later, a house was broken into 2 blocks away. They, however, never got those guys either, and we aren't sure whether or not this was related. But after that, there was nothing. No more break-ins at our house, nor at anyone else's house. And it's safe to say, now as an adult with my own kids, all the doors and windows remain locked at night, and we have guns in the house for protection. On Christmas Eve of 1997, I was invited over to my friend Michelle's house to celebrate Christmas with her and her family. For reference, this story comes from the perspective of a male who at the time was 25 years old. I was driving over from the nearby city of Milpitas over to San Jose, where she and her family welcomed me in with open arms. I brought some cupcakes and extra plates for the party, and for the next few hours, I spent time with Michelle and her cousins, eating incredible food, telling stories in the backyard next to their outdoor fireplace, and looking up at the stars, reminiscing about our college days. After all, we had known each other since the freshman year. Fast forward to around 11 p.m., and I'm starting to get pretty tired myself. After all, I needed to get home since the next morning I was going to be opening presents with my own family. So I wish everybody a good evening and a thank you for the invitation to the party, and Michelle joins me as she walks with me back to my car. These next moments, which would start off being a little bit awkward for me, would turn into the most nightmare-filled experience of my life that also almost cost my life too. So anyway, I parked at the end of the street. This is a cul-de-sac, by the way, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary as we stand there by my car and spend the next couple of minutes just chatting us two. As this was happening, we heard a huge argument coming from one of the nearby homes. We looked and we see a front door open wide, and a male in his early 20s, who looked drunk as all heck, is fumbling around and yelling at the neighbor who just kicked him out. It would later be revealed to me that he was the son of the homeowner. Anyway, I recall him saying something along the lines of, "You can't tell me what to do. I'm going to kill you one of these days." Basically, this guy was making threats to the homeowner. Talk about weird, but we just awkwardly stare at him, never keeping our eyes off of him as he starts to walk in our direction. Clearly not wanting to get involved, we don't say anything, and we just hope he's going to walk off and that was going to be the end of it. However, instead, I'm not even joking when I say this, he walks over to us and he says, "What, you want to fight me, Romeo?" I told him no and that we weren't looking for any sort of trouble, and now he all about loses it. He starts pushing me and telling me somebody is going to have to pay for making him angry, and I responded by saying, "Dude, it's not going to be me. Leave us alone and chill." I tell Michelle to back away and run back home, but she's refusing to leave my side, trying to also tell the guy to back off. After a few words of trying to de-escalate the situation, I still don't know why we just didn't walk away. I told him one thing that I think set him off. "Look man, you're obviously drunk, and I can smell the alcohol too. Do you need us to call help? We can go back to the house and get some." I guess it was me just trying to be a good Samaritan and trying to help him. Weird, right? Well, here's when it goes from scary to downright horrifying. In one quick swoop, his hands in his jacket, he pulls out a knife, lunges at me, and manages to stab me in the abdomen area. I fell to the ground almost immediately from the pain, and I watched as Michelle stood there in absolute shock. This guy suddenly freaking out of nowhere, almost as if realizing he had just messed up big time. He would take off running down the street just seconds later, dropping the knife in the process, and Michelle ended up screaming at the top of her lungs, getting the attention of the homeowner who had just kicked him out. He comes out to our help as 911 is called, and basically their whole neighborhood comes out to help me with stopping the bleeding and keeping me talking. I still thank them for all their help, as the paramedics would arrive to take me to the hospital. Michelle and her parents joined me at the hospital, where my parents and little brother would get there just 30 minutes afterwards. To cut a really long story short, I would make a full recovery, and the guy that stabbed me would be arrested and put behind bars. I would say that justice was served, and yes, it was. But there has always been a part of me, all these years that have passed on, that I'll have nightmares about that night. Nightmares where I get stabbed, but I don't end up making it out alive. Now, if there is one thing that came out of all of this, it happens to be with Michelle and I. You see, after that night, we became even more closer than ever before, and a couple of months later, we would officially start dating, becoming boyfriend and girlfriend. Today, Michelle is my wife. We have 3 kids, and Michelle and I really enjoy listening to the scary stories you narrate on your channel, Creepy Fox. She was actually the one that found your channel in late 2018, and we have been listening ever since. Thank you for providing us endless hours of content, and thank you for being such a great person. Blessings to you and your family, as well as all the amazing subscribers that listen to your channel this holiday season. In 2007, I'd flown from my hometown in Las Vegas to go and visit my grandma and grandpa, who at the time were living in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, about an hour west outside of Philadelphia. I would stay a total of 2 weeks, up until January 3rd, and while most of the days there were spent catching up on sleep, as well as being lazy, the night of Christmas Day itself would prove to be the most terrifying of them all, and all of it because of a misunderstanding. It's crazy thinking that I might not be here to tell you this really frightening story of mine. Some of you might laugh it off, and I kind of do as well as I look back on this, but when it happened, it was no laughing matter. Anyway, for some context to this story, I was 19 at the time, and this story comes from the perspective of an average ordinary female. For starters, while there are some neighbors around my grandparents' house, you never really saw them, and apart from this guy I'm going to mention, I didn't see anyone else. Also, the backyards for all these homes are super huge, and in my time there, on 3 separate occasions, I saw some of the neighbors' kids come on over to my grandparents' backyard to swing on their old swing set and also use the old trampoline. It was kind of interesting in a way, since back where I live in Las Vegas, you don't just walk onto people's property like that. Chances are, you're going to get the cops called on you. Speaking of which, my grandparents just told me not to trespass on the neighbor's yard that's to their left. On occasions before I arrived there, that neighbor would chase away the kids since he claimed the kids were stressing out his chickens, and that was causing them not to eat, which, unfortunately, led to a lot of them starving to death. Poor things. That was pretty sad, but I would listen to my grandfather. That is until their cat Miles ended up getting out. You see, Miles had this bad habit of sneaking out of the house back then, and he would go days without being seen nor heard from. Yes, he would eventually come back to the house, but one time my grandma had told me that there was dried up blood on his fur, and he had looked as if he had gotten injured in a fight and was limping. They would take him to the vet, but they told my grandparents to be more careful with Miles, especially since he was getting older. Well, anyway, back to what I was saying. He had gotten out because I left the back door open as I was helping bring in some gifts that we had gotten at their friend's Christmas party. I did actually happen to see that Miles had ran off to the neighbor's house that my grandpa had told me not to go to, but I told my grandpa that I would go get Miles, not telling him where I had seen him run off to, as to not upset my grandfather. After all, how would he know I would go over there? Did I forget to mention that it had been raining? No way was he going to risk getting wet. Now, I know I shouldn't have just run over there, but again, Miles is out there in the rain, and he means everything to my grandparents who can't really run. So, with my iPhone's flashlight, I walk through the tall bushes that separate the properties, and I see Miles, who is hiding on the neighbor's porch. Though the sounds of the light rain were around me, I whispered to Miles to come back to me and that it was all going to be okay. But what I get in response later on was even worse. You see, I walk up the steps of the porch, but all of a sudden, I see a light suddenly turn on from the window next to where I stood. Caught off guard, I jump back down the steps and I begin to walk over to a nearby tractor. This was because I remembered the stories my grandpa had told me about the neighbor. Well, needless to say, I looked toward the steps to see an old man who was holding a shotgun, pointing it in my general direction. Just imagine his surprise, seeing a petite hooded figure roaming around his backyard and his property. "Get off my property!" He did say some other words I probably shouldn't mention here, but needless to say, I dove behind that tractor as he begins to ask who was out there and what I was doing out there to begin with. "If you don't tell me who you are, I will shoot you." I held my phone to my chest as I can feel my heart begin to pound out of my chest, and I struggle to get any sort of sound out. Best way I can describe it was my lips were moving, but it's like someone had hit the mute button on me. I think it was just the fear taking over. "Who's out there? I'm warning you, this is your last chance." That snapped me out of it, and without any more hesitation, I shouted out and I said, "Please don't shoot. I'm not your enemy. I'm the granddaughter of Mr. Thompson. I'm trying to get Miles. He's on your porch. Please, I'm sorry." I then screamed for my grandfather, who little did I know was already in the process of looking for me. He shouted my name, and then I hear the man with a shotgun yell, "Fred, is that you?" That's not the actual first name of my grandfather, since I don't want to give his true name, but you get the basic idea. Anyway, my grandpa walks on over saying that it's him and tells the man it's okay and that indeed it is his granddaughter, that being me, who was in the backyard. Basically, if it wasn't for my grandpa helping to de-escalate the situation with the neighbor, I might have been shot accidentally, with him thinking I was a home intruder. He would later apologize, which I would accept and just decide not to get the police involved, as I figured, well, I'm probably never going to see this guy again. Let me just move on from it. Plus, I get it. The guy was defending his property, and he didn't know if I was a threat with a gun. At least he didn't fire the shotgun. I'll give him that. Yeah, I know there are some people out there who are going to say certain things, but I can't do anything about that. I'm simply explaining and telling you about how these events turned out. Anyway, we did get Miles back, and the neighbor who almost shot me would later get me flowers before I left, going on to further say how terrible he felt about the entire situation. Again, I just told him it was fine, and I would later return home with quite a story to tell my family, as well as my friends. A story about the time I was almost shot on Christmas night. Now, speaking of which, anybody out there ever had a situation similar to mine? Or am I the only one who was unfortunate to deal with something like this? It would be interesting to hear if you have a similar experience to mine. For context, this comes from the perspective of a female. I was 15 when this happened. My friends in this story are the same age as me. Anyway, this was Christmas Day of 2002, and it was quite a weird encounter if I do say so myself. I mean, most of the time when you think about the holidays, you picture spending time with your family, being at peace next to the Christmas tree and a fireplace, crackling with firewood, and heck, even some hot cocoa. I'm actually drinking some as I write this. Yeah, I know, breaking the fourth wall. Sorry, it's just me being silly. Anyway, let me tell you about what happened. It was Christmas afternoon, and I'd finally gotten a chance to go and hang out with my two best friends, who are brother and sister, who live down the street from me. We will call them Jonathan and Cindy. Now, instead of walking down to their house like I had done many times before, I instead went over in style. You see, just earlier that morning, I had unwrapped my main gift, which turned out to be a brand new scooter. My friends did have an extra scooter themselves, and they would always let me use it, and we would take turns using it, but I didn't have to do that anymore, thankfully. Anyway, we rode around the neighborhood for a little bit and then asked ourselves what we wanted to eat after I mentioned that I was hungry. We did think about the food at each other's respective homes, but we kind of wanted something a little bit different than just your typical Christmas dinner. So we thought for no more than 20 seconds, and we each said, almost in unison, tacos. Yes, there was a taco place near our neighborhood that was open 365 days of the year. This included Christmas and New Year's. Actually, I still love going there anytime I come to visit my parents for Christmas and New Year's, and my kids love it too. But yeah, I went to go tell my mom that we were going to get tacos, and we made our way about 2 minutes from our neighborhood to the taqueria, and each ended up getting ourselves a plate with a side of rice and beans. We ended up taking our food outside to one of the tables, and we sat there for about half an hour, just talking and eating. That was until from out of nowhere, a random guy walks over to us and takes a seat next to my friend Cindy. For a quick description, pardon me by the way since I suck with people's descriptions, he was, I would say, mid to late 20s. He smelled like really bad BO, had long dirty blonde hair, blue eyes, acne and stubble on his face, very skinny, and about 5'11". His clothes look old and had a bunch of holes in it as well. Now bear in mind, he didn't even say anything at all at first, but we could see he was eyeballing my friend Cindy up and down, and we asked him what he wanted, and he finally did speak up, asking us straight up, "Hey, you kids want to smoke some weed with me? I got plenty." We don't smoke, so we told him no, to which he replies with, "Well, why not? It will make you feel real good." Again, we give him our reasons as to why we don't want to smoke, and he said, whatever with you three, I'm out." He walked away into the nearby alleyway. Well, okay, pretty weird, we thought, but at least he was gone, right? Not exactly. You see, 5 minutes later, just about to leave, we notice he returns, but this time he has a buddy. This guy was way more massive than the first, towering over us at about 6'4". I would say he weighed around 260 pounds. And had a beer belly to him, and his shirt and pants had nasty stains on them. Starting to get weirded out by this whole thing, we pick up our pace, but they just ended up following us. At this point, it was getting kinda weird, so Jonathan pretty much told them to go F themselves. It turned out that this was a huge mistake, because the largest of the two took out a box cutter and said, from what I remember, "I'm going to cut that tongue out of your mouth, boy." That was what caused us to panic, and thus I and Cindy screamed like banshees, grabbing the attention of some people at the corner of the street who were walking their dog, who were further away from us. They did turn around, and this was when we noticed the two creeps turn around as well, and run back into the alleyway from before. Needless to say, this couple kept an eye on us as we went back to our neighborhood, and we did decide to call the cops to tell them about what happened. Sadly, they didn't do much, but if there was one thing, we never did encounter those two again, nor did my friends see them either. Yeah, I know this might be a tad mild of a scary story to share, but it was what I have, and since it happened on Christmas, I figured you might like to share this for a Christmas stories video. Anyway, I wish you and everyone a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I live in Anchorage, Alaska, and work at Ted Stevens International Airport for Alaskan Airlines. I've been here now for going 7 years, and it's very different from my life when I used to live in Fairbanks. That's where my family is originally from. Last Christmas, I was able to get a week off and decided to drive up to visit my family for the holidays. Now, anyone who might be familiar with the drive from Anchorage to Fairbanks, you know just how quiet and lonesome it gets. Once you leave the city limits, you're surrounded by endless mountains, fields and trees that are blanketed with white powdery snow. It really is something I can't put into words. You just need to see it for yourself. Now, I was actually taking care of some chores at home, as I'd be gone for quite a while, meaning I didn't get on the road until about 2 p.m. Accompanying me on this road trip was my adorable cat Luna. That morning it was about 5 degrees, but by 5 p.m. it was reaching minus 15. You really couldn't be out for long before you started getting headaches and any exposed skin would start to burn. Not that it's a concern, since Luna and I are inside sitting comfortably in the car with the heater on. Now I'll save you the trouble and skip to what actually happened, as most of what happens next is just me driving in the middle of nowhere, with the last sign of humans being over an hour ago. So I ended up having to go number 1 after I drank most of the coffee from my thermos. Being female, stopping on the side of the road to use the restroom wasn't something I was really a big fan of. I had done it once before when driving to Seward. Trust me, it wasn't fun, but there's just something about being so vulnerable in the middle of nowhere that makes going potty that much more difficult. Luckily, I had spotted a sign for a rest area in about 10 miles and I was able to hold it in until I got there. This rest stop was just a little cement building with one male and one female restroom. I saw no other vehicle nearby, which did alleviate some of the anxiety I had about being sneaked up upon. I watched too many scary movies, I swear. Anyway, I packed in my 9mm Smith & Wesson and I brought it with me as I slowly opened the female restroom. Again, I'm checking for any signs of activity. Now, I had left the car running, by the way, with Luna asleep in the back seat, since I didn't want her getting sick being out in the cold. Out here, where I was, it was about minus 20 degrees, and sitting on the toilet seat was going to be impossible, so I ended up having to get creative, which I'll save you the embarrassing details. Not even 30 seconds later, yes, it took me that long just to begin because of it being freezing, I hear car tires crunching on the snow. I start to think, did I forget to put on the brakes, and was my car rolling down the hill? That couldn't be, I just knew it. I was correct, however, because once the snow crunching gets closer to the building, I hear a car door opening and then close. My nerves started to pick up, and my heart is racing like crazy, thinking why of all places did somebody just have to conveniently show up? Well, what other choice did I have? I surely wasn't going to stay in this icebox, and I surely wasn't going to let paranoia stop me from leaving either. Therefore, I put on my big girl pants, kicked the door out, and start walking over to my car. Guess what? There's a truck parked right next to me, and sitting in the passenger seat smoking a cigarette was a random man. "Good evening," the man says, as he opens his car door and steps out onto the snow, being illuminated by his headlights. "Hello," I ushered back in a nervous tone, just a few feet away from my car door. "Hang on, I just got here. What's a cutie like you doing out here in the middle of nowhere?" The man responds as he walks over to me, blocking me from leaving. "Just had to use the restroom. I got family waiting for me. Now, if you don't mind, I really gotta get going." I try to step to his left, but then he gets in my way yet again. "Nah, I think your family can wait. Let's spend some time in my truck. I promise it's going to be fun." The smirk on his face pretty much said it all. This guy was looking to get lucky. Under normal circumstances, this 5'4", 115-pound female would have stood no chance against this behemoth, easily over 6 foot and approaching 300 pounds. "Get out of the way, I'm warning you," I said as I take a few steps back, reaching into my back pocket. "What are you going to do?" He doesn't get to finish his sentence as I pull out my handgun. Whoa, okay, calm down. I'm just playing with you. No need to get so defensive. Get out of the way. If I ever see you again, you're going to be sorry." He doesn't say another word. He tucks his tail between his legs and walks back into his truck. He then drives away, as Luna is hissing at the man and all the hair on her back is standing straight up. I quickly jumped inside my vehicle, not only having a full-on panic attack, but freezing from being out there for so long. It was about 2.5 minutes in total, but enough to cause quite the headache. Anyway, after I was able to catch my breath and I made it to Fairbanks just before midnight, this was where I took a nice hot long shower and then slept until 2 p.m. the next afternoon. Hey Creepy Fox, long-time listener here. Though this incident was about 30 years ago, I still remember it because that was the year that I met my girlfriend, now wife, Megan. It was Christmas Eve. I was a young 22 years old, and it was 1987. I was working at a drive-up convenience store in the downtown LA area. For those of you in Southern California who have been around for that long, you actually might remember that year that we got a record amount of rain that we hadn't seen in almost a decade. Even most of the streets were getting flooded. Anyway, there I was sitting on my chair enjoying a warm cup of coffee with a bagel when out from nowhere a man walked up wearing a black poncho. I gave him a warm welcome and told him that if he needed anything, I was here to help him. I then returned back to my delicious snack and listening to the radio. The man never did say anything to me. He kinda just walked around and then disappeared behind the building 30 seconds later. Bear in mind, I wasn't able to see his face due to the poncho's hoodie covering his identity. That and also the lights at our drive-up convenience store are pretty dim. It wasn't until 2 weeks after this incident the boss finally decided to upgrade to brighter illumination. Anyway, a strange sight, but I quickly wrote him off as just a complete random. I was more focused on getting home so I could take a nice hot long shower and eat some of the cooking my mom had prepared me. About 2 minutes later, the rain beginning to fall even more heavier and thunder clapping in the sky above, a black SUV with its windows completely tinted pulls up into the drive-thru. I then placed my cup of coffee on the countertop and then walked over to the vehicle to help out this customer. But what happens next was one of the most frightening experiences of my entire life. Every single door, minus the driver's side, opens, and men in ski masks jump out armed with handguns. They start telling me to put all the money that's in the cash register into a bag. Meanwhile, I'm standing there in complete shock. The men repeated their aggressive commands as finally I turn around and head toward the cash register. There waiting for me was the first man I'd seen just a couple of minutes earlier, the one with a poncho, who I later determined was the lookout. He too had revealed he was packing heat, as he has a gun as well. All of this seemed to go in slow motion, but was honestly only about 30 seconds. 30 seconds of complete nightmare fuel. We only had about $500 in cash in the register, but they didn't care whatsoever. They took the money and even some packs of beer from the refrigerator, as well as stacks of scratcher tickets. Once the men hopped back into their vehicle, the driver looked at me dead in the eyes and said something that I'll never forget. "If you tell anyone or we find out that you ratted us out to the police, you're going to get shot." They stormed off and I just sat there for the next 5 minutes at a loss of words, having a panic attack. I was so scared that it wasn't until the customer had arrived just a little bit later and looked at me that I was finally able to snap out of it. Although in those moments that customer arrived, I thought it was the robbers coming back for more, but it wasn't. I ended up explaining to the gentleman about my ordeal, and it turned out that he was a security guard just clocking off of his shift who wanted to come and pick up a Pepsi and some chips. I begged him and begged him to stay there and keep me company, and bless his heart, he did until the police got there. I did file a report, and an investigation was launched by the LAPD, but I still to this day am unsure of those men's whereabouts. I ended up quitting just a few days later after that, and I had a falling out with the manager and my co-workers. Now fast forward all these years later, I live in Salt Lake City, and I'm married to my wife Megan. We have 3 kids around your age, with the youngest one being a huge fan of yours. Anyway, we want to wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas, Creepy Fox. Here's to another year. This happened to me last Christmas. I was 17 years old when my mom had left me with my sister to go to work for the whole Christmas Eve. Me and my sister thought it'd be best if we ordered some pizza and play some board games. In this story, I'll refer to my sister as Jenna. A few hours after playing Monopoly, we kinda grew bored and went upstairs to do whatever in the heck we were going to do. My sister's the first to enter her room, while I'm the last one to enter mine. I went in, put the GTA 5 disc into the Xbox One S, and so on. Another few hours came by and now it's 7:45 p.m. I didn't realize I was playing GTA 5 for a few hours, so I took a break and exited my bedroom to use the restroom. So I went in, and while I was taking a number two, I thought I heard the front door closing. So I quickly wiped myself, flushed the toilet, washed my hands, and then opened the bathroom door. I yelled out, "Mom?" No answer. It's strange because my mother always yells back when I call her name. Could it be that it was my sister? I yelled Jenna's name and she opens her bedroom door. She had pulled out her earphones to ask me what was up. My jaw dropped. At first, Jenna is wondering why I'm so freaked out by her response. Then, we hear a sound of slow footsteps coming up the stairs. I get Jenna into my room, locked the door, turned off the Xbox and the television, grabbed a military pistol my grandfather gave me a few Christmases ago, and crouched next to my bed. I have to admit, I was pretty scared, and so was Jenna. But now I was very angry. I was ready to shoot that gun on whoever in the heck was in our house. We hear Jenna's bedroom door creak, and I'm aiming at the door, waiting for the time to come. The footsteps came from Jenna's bedroom all the way to my bedroom, and then there was silence. So I waited a few minutes, which felt like an eternity, and all of a sudden the footsteps just walked away from my door. A few more minutes later, we hear the front door closing. So I told Jenna to stay put while I checked the hallways, her bedroom, and the downstairs. I was a couple of stairwells away from down there, and this is when I realized that my mother had bought security cameras not too long before this incident. So I went into my mother's bedroom, opened up her laptop, and checked the security footage. So far, there are a couple of cameras inside the house, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the hallway. I put in the time it happened, and it frightens me to this day. What I was looking at on the camera in the living room was not my mom, but somebody wearing all black with a white creepy looking mask. I don't know if it was a man or a woman, but this person unlocked our front door with a key, which I really don't know if it's our key or if this person found a door with the same type of keys. The person walks in, closes the door, and right as I yell my mother's name, he or she looks up to the ceiling and then walks towards the upstairs, slowly. The person then walks into Jenna's room and walks out not too long after. This is what scares the living daylights out of me for the rest of my life. This person walks towards my bedroom door and stops. No movement for like a minute. That's until he or she looks around. The person sees the camera and stares at it for a couple of minutes. Then they walk back down the stairs and out the front door. Naturally, Jenna and I called the police. The police came by and they took a look at the footage. It turns out that this person wearing all black and a white creepy mask is a male because, according to one of the victims, the person wearing the same thing the night he broke in beat the victim and tells the poor old man to shut up. Sadly, he had beaten the victim a few days before breaking into my house. Because of the situation, my mom had to come home early from work, and we couldn't sleep for the night until morning, and God only knows what else this man was trying to do. So, to the creepy guy who beat the old man and broke into my house, if I ever see you in here again, and you threaten myself or my family, you're going to be shot dead. This is another story about an intruder who came into my house on Christmas Eve, but this was way scarier. A week after the incident, my mom, my sister Jenna, and I thought that nobody else was ever going to break into our house ever again, but we were horribly wrong, and here's why. So my mom and Jenna were leaving the house to go on a trip to Las Vegas, and me, I wanted to stay home because I just wanted to. I'm pretty much a lazy person who didn't really want to go on vacations, and so what. I also asked my mom if she doesn't mind if I bring somebody over. We'll call my friend David. My mom says yes, and she doesn't mind if I bring somebody over. So I called David to come over to my house for a few nights since my mom and sister were going to be gone. He said he'll be coming over in about 5 minutes. 5 minutes came by and my friend David came over to my house, and then after that my mother and sister left. Once they're gone, we thought, why not watch a basketball game? David grabbed the remote to turn on the TV and change the channel, while I ordered McDonald's from Uber Eats. About an hour into watching the Atlanta Hawks play the Indiana Pacers, The Uber Eats driver rang the doorbell. I grabbed it and said, "Happy New Year's," to the person who picked up my food from the nearest McDonald's. Just a few minutes after us stuffing french fries and chicken nuggets into our mouths, I heard a ringtone. It came from my phone. So I wiped the grease out of my hands so that way I wouldn't get some on my phone. I pressed the home button on my iPhone to see who texted me, and it's not from my mom, not from my sister, nor is it from the Uber driver. Is it David's phone? I turned to look at David and he doesn't have his phone on hand. I asked him if he's the one who texted me and he says, no. After asking him that, I then read the text message. This is how it started. Unknown. Remember me? Me. Who is this? Unknown. Remember me? Me. If you tell me who this is, I'll see if I remember you. Unknown. I'm the person who broke into your house. That's where I stopped responding. How did this intruder get my phone number? My friend now stopped eating and asked, "What's going on?" I then told him about the time an intruder broke into my house on Christmas Eve. He then asked me what he looked like. I told him that the person was wearing a white creepy looking ski mask and had dark clothing at the time. This is where it frightens me even more. David said to me, "A few days before Christmas, I woke up in the middle of the night to hear somebody opening my neighbor's front door. At first I thought it was my neighbor, so I looked out the window and see nothing. And that was until a couple of minutes later, I saw a person wearing all black with the same mask. So I asked him if he wants to see the CCTV footage from my mother's room, and he says, sure. We then walk up the stairs into my mom's room. I sat down and as I turned on the laptop, it's telling me that I need a passcode to get in. I really don't want to ask my mom for a password just to show my friend the last week's footage. So right as I gave up and closed the laptop, I heard my phone ding again. And sure enough, the intruder texted me, "What are you doing upstairs?" I felt like I was about to have a heart attack. A few seconds after reading the text message, David lets out a full scream. I turned to my friend and then turned to the window he's looking at. The person, wearing the same thing the week before, came out of the bushes in full-on sprints to my backyard door. He then banged on it like some mental patient from an asylum. Now instead of locking ourselves into my room, I grabbed a .45 and ran downstairs. And as I came into the kitchen, sure enough, the intruder's still at my backyard door. I aimed a pistol at him and he just sprinted back, tripping halfway into the bushes. David then called the police while I patrolled the backyard. Now as the cops came and looked all around my house outside, there was still no sign of him. When the cops also noticed the CCTV cameras inside the kitchen, the living room and the upstairs hallway, they asked us if they can check the footage from the day the intruder first broke in and all the way to the day the intruder banged on the backyard door. We told them we don't know the password on the laptop. They then asked me where my parents are, and I told them that my mother and sister were currently in Vegas and they wouldn't be back for a few days. They suggested that I go to David's house until my mom comes back. So I called my mom, explained about the text messages and the time the intruder tries to break into the backyard door, and I told her that I was staying at David's house until the day she comes back from Vegas. A few days went by and she and Jenna came back home. Nothing else happened afterwards, and I definitely hope that it stays that way. But if anything else comes up, I'll make sure to update you. This is part 3 to my story submissions. This just happened a couple of nights ago, but let me start off with the very first incident, and then I'll tell you about what happened that night. On Christmas Eve 2018, I was home alone with my sister Jenna when an intruder came into our house. When this intruder left the house, I checked the security footage and found that an intruder with a scary looking white mask and wearing all black. Then, a week after the first incident, he even texted me and tried to break open the back door of my house. Surely because of those scary incidents, it left us paranoid with fear every time we walked into the house, whether it's from school or the grocery store or anywhere else outside of the house. We always had a bad feeling that the Christmas intruder was going to break in again. Of course, a few weeks earlier, he broke in while me, my sister, and Jenna and my mother were at school, but he never stole anything. So now back to what happened a couple of nights ago. My mom left me and my sister home, but not without a couple of friends of mine. After my friends came over, my mom left. They're not the type of people who thinks I'm just being paranoid like in some sort of horror movie. They take me very seriously. Now, I was in the middle of watching the Chicago Bulls game when I received a phone call from an unknown number. So I muted the TV, and this is how the conversation goes. Me. Hello? Unknown. Remember me? My friend Danny says, back away from my friend, or I'll swear I'll make you cry out blood. Unknown. I don't think you will. Danny. Watch me do it. Unknown. Right now? Danny. When you come over here. Unknown. Check your grammar. He then hung up. Danny was so furious it got me and my other friend Zach more furious. So I turned off the TV, grabbed a baseball bat I used back when I played freshman baseball in high school, and we waited in the dark. Why in the dark, you ask? Because maybe he'll never know if we're not home or whatnot. 2 hours come by when we heard the doorknob at the front door struggling to open. As the front door opens, we surprised him by jumping out behind the couch in the living room that's next to the door, and then we ran out like a running back in tackle football and beat him. 10 seconds after giving him a good beating, Zach took off the mask, and it turns out the stalker was a classmate of mine in my English class. I gave him one more swing to the head while he's covering his face, and 3 minutes while interrogating our English classmate, the police arrived. After they put him in handcuffs and into the back seat of the police car, one of the police officers later told us that he was previously arrested for breaking into his former friend's house because his friend was not comfortable with him. Not long after the police interrogated my classmate, they came back to my house and told me, Jenna, and my mom that he's also broken into a few other houses and then stalked them for a few days. This definitely goes down as one of the scariest times of my life. Now, I do have some other scary stories. They're not related to this one, but if you like to hear them, I'll make sure to send them in for a future episode. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Hey, just to let you all know, for the month of December, I have brought back the Christmas Fox Creepy Fox, which is going to be available all the way until the end of December. These are available in shirts, stickers, sweaters, coffee mugs, you name it. You can pick it up with the link in the description, or you can also check out the little merch shelf right below the video. These are great gifts for fans of the Creepy Fox, or if you know somebody in the family, or you have friends that enjoy my videos. So if you missed your opportunity to pick up this design last year, now is your chance, as they're going to be available for a limited time. Anyway, let's continue on with the scary stories. This was 2004 or 2005. I forget exactly which year, but I know it was the mid-2000s, and I was on a road trip to visit my family for Christmas. This was just a few days before the big holiday. Anyway, at the time, I was driving a Dodge Caravan, and I was somewhere in the middle of Michigan. It had been snowing most of that evening, and I was looking to find a place to grab a bite to eat. I still had another few hours to get to my family's home, mind you, but I knew I wasn't going to make it. Therefore, I ended up stopping at a rest stop at approximately 9 p.m. It was here that I remember there being a McDonald's, a motel, and a gas station. As I pulled into this small area, I could see about 10 other vehicles. Most were parked at the motel, presumably because they were staying the night. As I exit my car, I'm hit with a blast of frigid cold air that almost made me dive back into my car, but I was too hungry to let that cold get to me. Anyway, I make my way in and head over to the front counter. I remember ordering the 10-piece chicken nuggets with french fries and a Sprite, and waited for my order while watching the TV in the lobby. By the way, the McDonald's I recall had one other patron who looked to be like a man in his mid-50s. And nonetheless, when my order was ready, I take a seat and mind my own business. A few minutes later, however, that 50-something-year-old man I mentioned walks over, and I remember him saying, "Hey, do you mind if I sit with you?" I responded with a "sure, why not," and he sits directly across from me. I want to say we talked for a solid 30 minutes, going over our Christmas plans and other family traditions. It was pretty nice. He introduced himself as Jeremy and he told me he would dress up as Santa Claus at his local mall. I don't think he needed to tell me otherwise because he had that Santa look. White hair, with white long beard, and some glasses too. He was also wearing one of those typical Christmas holiday sweaters. It was nice, but man, I miss the times you can just start a conversation with a random stranger. I feel like nowadays it's almost impossible to do so because of all the creeps. Anyway, it's in the middle of the conversation that I happen to look just past Jeremy and saw a man enter with a ski mask on. I remember having to do a double take, sort of like, huh? Is he serious? But before I could get another word out, the man with a mask takes out a gun from his pocket and fires 2 warning shots into the ceiling. Myself and the Jeremy fellow immediately dive under the table as more gunshots echo throughout the store. Stay next to me. I won't let him get to you before going through me first. To think this complete stranger I just met was going to go out of his way to protect me with his life. I was in shock, but we both watch as the man in the ski mask heads over to the front counter. We can then hear him demand the cashier hand over all the money they had in the register. Poor girl, she was like a 19 or something year old. She was frightened beyond belief, not that I could really blame her. While this is going on, Jeremy decided that he was going to do something about the whole thing. From our conversation, I learned that he had served in the Marines when he was younger, and his training had told him that he needed to protect as many people as possible, even if that meant putting his life on the line. After all, this ski mask creep was growing more impatient as he fired a couple more gunshots into the ceiling. Anyway, while the man was distracted, Jeremy starts approaching the armed intruder. At the very last second, as the robber is putting the cash into his backpack, Jeremy lunges at the man's pistol, which goes flying across the front lobby floor. "Someone grab it, quick!" he shouted with intensity as another cashier runs over to secure it. At this point, 5 other people had entered the McDonald's, and without questioning what was happening, they went to go help Jeremy, properly subduing the man. These men, who looked to be like truck drivers, had no problem with this scrawny masked individual. In summary, police officers showed up 20 minutes later and they arrested and took the man away. And that was pretty much it. After giving my statement with the police and checking up with Jeremy, I ended up leaving almost an hour later. It's been easily over 15 years, and I do wonder where Jeremy is today. I hope he's still with us, because he was my hero that night. Growing up as a kid, Christmas was always my favorite time of the year. I mean, why wouldn't it be? It was the one day of the year apart from your birthday you can wake up and get presents. Maybe that's just the mindset of a child, but there is this pure magic to it, kind of like when you go to Disneyland for the first time. It's hard to describe, but even though I'm mentioning these sweet memories, I want to go ahead and talk about a certain Christmas Eve, in which quite literally, I encountered the Grinch. Now, this was back around 2009 in upstate New York, when I was 16 years old. It had been a very boring start to winter break, as all I remember doing was just playing Modern Warfare 2, which at the time was extremely popular. I recall the nights I'd be up until 3 in the morning playing Domination with friends. Anyway, I did mention Christmas Eve, didn't I? Yes, that's correct. I remember my family and I had returned from a family party at my grandma's house, and my parents were extremely exhausted. Now, try as I did, my parents kept insisting we open the presents Christmas morning. I honestly couldn't wait, but I told myself I'd just play Modern Warfare 2 until the sun rises. Thus, I turn on the Xbox 360 and sit on the couch, and I get to playing. Now, just to quickly give you a layout of my home, it's 2 stories, with the living room, where I was at, being at the very front of the house. The kitchen was right next to the living room, with a back door that leads you into the backyard. Right next to the kitchen was the staircase that leads you upstairs. It's up here you have my parents' room, mine, as well as our only restroom. Anyway, back to what I was getting at. It was very late into the morning. I want to say it was around 4 a.m. and I had fallen asleep on the couch. I remember I was awoken by what sounded like something scratching against a window. This was then followed by snow crunching just outside the house. This caught my attention as I'm a very light sleeper, so I sat up listening, confused. Surely my parents weren't out there, as they would have no business waking up at 4 a.m. So I went ahead and take a peek outside, but I am unable to see anyone. On top of that, the footsteps and scratching had ceased. So assuming I was sleep deprived and imagining everything, I went upstairs to use the restroom. This is when things would become pretty scary. I must have been there for about 5 minutes scrolling through my phone when I happened to hear the kitchen back door slide open. This was then followed by footsteps. Curiosity was now telling me to go and investigate the noise, thus I began to slowly approach the staircase. Once I was at the bottom and take a peek into the living room, I made the worst mistake possible by saying, "Mom? Dad? Are you two up early?" I mumbled with a yawn, following soon thereafter. I couldn't believe my eyes. Crouching next to our Christmas tree, being illuminated by the glow of its lights, was a man with a ski mask holding a large hunting knife. I remember freezing as the man just stares over at me. It's sort of like a wild animal might do when it's staring down at your headlights. Anyway, I don't even get a word out when he suddenly perks up and begins approaching. This was now my cue to head upstairs, as I recall the panic in my breath urging me not to look back. Last I remember seeing was the man's head just peeking over the top of the steps as I slammed my parents' bedroom door shut. "Mom, Dad, wake up. There's a guy with a knife." This was all it took for both of them to suddenly wake up. My dad immediately grabs the shotgun underneath the bed and tells both of us to hide. Meanwhile, my mom calls 911. As she's doing this, the man manages to open the bedroom door, which I hadn't locked apparently in my rush, and my dad takes a shot, missing the creep as he jumps out of the way. We then hear him running down the stairs as my dad chases him outside. Now, luckily the police department was super close to our house, which was nice because police officers actually caught the guy as he was making his getaway. Anyway, once he was in custody and the police officers talked with my parents, we soon found out how he made his way in. The back door wasn't locked, which was how the man managed to make his way in. We would later learn that the man had quite the criminal history to him, and he had been jailed on multiple occasions. Safe to say he spent his Christmas holiday behind bars, after what seemed to be like him trying to rob our house. As for myself and my family, we were shaken up, but we eventually settled in with some Christmas movies and Christmas food. So that was the Christmas that I believe I met the real-life Grinch. This was actually just last year, and though it might not be as creepy as some other stories you've heard, it still did catch me off guard, and here is exactly why. It had all started after I had gotten off of work. I know what you're thinking. Working on Christmas Eve? Ugh. Well, to be fair, I did get double pay, so it wasn't really that bad. Anyway, I was heading over to a friend's Christmas party and he called me wanting to know if I could pick up some sodas. So I assured him I would take care of it and head over to this convenience store with a drive-thru. Of course, me being the idiot I was, I had no cash, which meant I would have to go and withdraw some myself. The downside to that place, they only accepted cash. Luckily, there was a Chase Bank with an ATM machine just around the block, so I head over there. Once I arrive, I walk over to the building, which was only illuminated by a small street light. It really made it easy for somebody to be hiding, not that I was expecting any issues. So I put my card in and I start to punch in my code, when out of seemingly nowhere I feel something press against my back, followed by somebody whispering into my ear, "You're being mugged. Do as I say, and I promise you're not going to be hurt." I froze and my hands started to shake. The voice alone had me scared as a kid in a haunted house. "I need you to withdraw $1,000, then you're going to hand it over." I reminded him that I was only allowed to withdraw $500 as that was the limit, so he tells me that that was fine. Bear in mind, I'm sweating and thinking that at any moment he was going to shoot me dead. If that was the case, I wasn't going to go down without a fight. You see, I had pepper spray in my pocket. If I could just reach for it, I might just be able to make it out of this in one piece. So I remember making up a random excuse and saying that I could use my other card to take out more money, and he agrees. Really, I was using the opportunity to prepare myself with the pepper spray. So I grab it, saying it was a lighter along with my ID card, and pretend to put it into the machine. This was the point where he pushes me to the side, and I see that his weapon of choice was what looked to be like a BB gun. It had a little orange tip which gave away its true purposes. Sure, he was looking to mug me, but he was hoping I wouldn't have noticed this little prop. I now take the opportunity to pepper spray him as the pistol falls to the ground and he begins to scream. Unfortunately, it seemed I hadn't connected with the pepper spray properly, and this is the point where he takes out a very real switchblade, and now he begins to follow me. I booked it over to a nearby convenience store where, out of all nights, a police officer was talking to the cashier while drinking his coffee. Talk about lady luck. Nonetheless, after a quick little struggle, he handcuffs the man, and after I get my name cleared, I grab my belongings and finally head over to buy the sodas. Let's just say I had quite a story to tell my friends when I arrived at the Christmas party. Side note, what I did was pretty reckless, and I highly recommend if you have the opportunity to run, you do so. I got lucky in that the pistol wasn't real, but had it been, things could have turned out that much worse. My advice, do what you think is right. If you have the opportunity to defend yourself, do it. If not, don't take any chances that might get yourself killed. With Christmas coming up in a few weeks, I remembered an experience I had when I worked at my first job. We're going to go back to around 2016 when I was a sophomore in college. I was 19 years old and I was working at Target, a pretty basic ordinary job for any college kid. As for my expertise, so to speak, I worked in the electronics section. Pretty much I was in charge of ringing up customers who were looking to get TVs or video game consoles, whatever was their fancy. Seeing as it was just a couple of days before Christmas, I picked up a lot of hours. Now that I was on winter break, I didn't really mind since I was trying to save up to buy a new car. Anyway, it was now Christmas Eve and I was finally off of work after being there for almost 9 hours straight. I thought as a nice reward I would treat myself to some nice pizza. Thankfully, the pizza parlor next to my specific Target was open during the holidays, and I wasted no time heading over to pick up some pepperoni pizza. Now, as you might expect on such a busy holiday evening, it was pretty packed, and there was no way I was waiting in that small lobby of theirs. Standing outside wasn't an option either as it was raining and I had no umbrella, so I opted for the text message notifications and I went to wait inside my car. I was in there for about 20 minutes watching some silly videos and browsing Reddit, trying to pass the time. At one point, I must have been so unaware of my surroundings that I hadn't noticed the man standing right next to my driver's side window. There I was laughing like a complete moron, when all of a sudden here is this tall figure towering over me. Naturally, my first instinct was to lock the door and raise up my window, which was slightly down. Even so, it took me a second to realize that the man standing outside of my car was a homeless man who often stood outside our Target asking for money. He never did anything bad, but I did find his presence a bit alarming. After all, why was he just standing there and with a knife? "Hey, can you put the window down? I need to talk to you," he said, while rain falls down his long greasy hair. "No, I don't think so. You can hear me just fine. What do you need? Can I sit in there with you?" Under normal circumstances, if this was a family member or a friend, or heck, even a coworker, sure, why not? But a man with a knife? No way. I told him I was leaving, to which now he snaps at me. The man literally screams as if he was on something and hops onto the front of my car. From here he begins kicking at the window, which does actually cause some cracks to form. I'm all but scared and confused at this point because it seemed as if he had something in his system, maybe some sort of drugs. I wasn't sure whether or not to call police first or an ambulance, but one thing was for certain, I was going to get out of this situation one way or another. So I turned the car on and press on the gas ever so slightly. This causes him to slip and fall on his backside. You would think that would be it, but instead I can hear him curse at me as he starts chasing me, knife in the air. Well, let's just say I didn't stick around for the pizza. Instead, I drove back over to the Target and I run inside where I mentioned the intoxicated man with the knife, and this was told to the security guard who works in there. However, by the time he heads out there and the police arrive, the man with the knife was long gone. That was it. That is, of course, until a few days later. That same man was arrested after he tried to mug a couple just outside in the parking lot. He also had a knife. Anyway, I haven't seen him around the area since. Edit. For those wondering, I never did get my pizza that night, so that was unfortunate. This was a few years ago, some days before Christmas. I was 20 at the time, and I was returning home for a winter break. In order to get home, I took an Uber from my college campus, which would drop me off at the train station. From here, it was 5 hours north, and I got home. Now, under normal circumstances, the ride over would be fairly uneventful. Say apart from talking to some fellow passengers. I had made the trip 2 times already, and it always went peacefully. But the reason why I wanted to send this one in is because something sort of strange happened along the way. However, if there was one good thing about this experience of mine, it's that I made some pretty awesome friends. Okay, so I head over to the train station just fine, bored, and took my seat next to a nice family. We talked for a bit, and I learned that they were also taking a trip to visit family for Christmas. They were a mom, a dad, and 2 little boys. For them, it was their first time ever using the train, and they were beyond ecstatic to be seeing the countryside for the first time. Me having so many little cousins and having experience with the kiddos, I talked to these kids and told them some cool Christmas stories. I think the parents really appreciated that. Anyway, after a bit of talking, I settled in with some headphones and music, and I took a nap. 3 hours in, and we ended up making a stop so that I could transfer over to my next train for the rest of the trip. This family was going to a different train that would be leaving shortly after mine. So I wished them safe travels and happy holidays, and they head over to wait for their train. Meanwhile, I spent approximately 25 minutes sitting at a train station coffee shop as I waited. As I sat there drinking my Americano and having a muffin, a man, presumably looking homeless, walked up to me wanting to know if I had some extra change. I gave him a couple of dollars out of kindness and thought that he would just leave. But instead he now takes my kind gesture as an invitation to sit next to me. Weird, but so far he hasn't really done anything wrong. So far. Hey, where are you heading? Maybe you'd like to spend the night with me, he said with a creepy smile. Well, at least he was straightforward, I'll give him that. I appreciate that, sir, but I'm going to see my family. He then started mumbling to himself before he says, Hey, would you like to have some of this with me? Come on, let's head to the back of the train station. He takes out a small Ziploc with what looked to be like some sort of white powder. Now, I'm not dumb, and I could already tell this guy was up to no good, so I told him that I was okay. He, however, kept insisting, and I was starting to get a bit creeped out. Thus, I get up and start heading to my train, which, by the way, hadn't arrived just yet. This creep now begins to follow me as he begins to call me various vulgar names, and telling me now that I would be sorry for ignoring his comments. Seriously, it was starting to grow a bit concerning because some of the things he was describing were pretty messed up. They were of the sexual nature. Thankfully, a familiar face had caught wind of my new stalker buddy, the nice man from the train, the family I met. They had overheard this guy calling me names and walked over to approach him. Hey mate, leave her alone, don't you have better things to do? He says, as I walk over to them. Mind your own business, this doesn't concern you. He then takes out a small pocket knife, which now had the attention of others. Look, we aren't wanting trouble, put that thing away. The creep completely ignored him and went mad. He charged toward this dad as I heard his family cry out for the police. But no lie, he literally countered by pulling out a suplex, like something you'd see in WWE or AEW. He then put him into a submission hold as some security guards came up to break it up. Thankfully, they took the stalker away, and luckily everybody was okay. I thanked him, to which he told me that he was just doing his part to help out a friend. By the way, I questioned him on his awesome wrestling skills, and he told me that he was a pro wrestling coach. Really, it's so cool how you meet the most amazing people when you travel. Anyway, when my train arrived, the kiddos, his wife and himself, all gave me a hug and a proper send-off, and I eventually arrived home to my family a couple of hours later. So that was the time I had an encounter with a creep at the train station, and a wrestler, I'm going to call him that by the way, tagged in, did his finishing move so to speak, did the 1, 2, 3, and took the win. This experience of mine, I must say, is at the top when it comes to the definition of a creepy experience. Whenever I tell my friends about it, I sorta just laugh it off. But when you hear about what I had to go through one winter break in 2015, you're going to think twice about those who you meet. I'll try to keep this short, but basically I'd broken up with my girlfriend a few days before school's winter break, and I was pretty bummed out. It turns out that she was seeing somebody else, and I was apparently just some sort of toy of hers. It's pretty harsh, but basically that's how I felt. Funny enough, she would call and text me saying how she was sorry and that I should give her another chance. I pretty much told her I would remain neutral, but I wouldn't go out of my way to see her nor talk to her. Thinking the high route would save my problems, I began the winter break a bit upset, but with an ease of mind knowing I was finally free to do whatever I wanted to do. My parents promised we would go snowboarding, and that was something I'd been looking forward to for months. However, before we left, something happened. I was at a friend's house, which in this story we'll refer to him as Billy. Billy and I had been playing Call of Duty, and during our play session, one of the controllers pretty much died, which left us having to take turns to play. I reminded Billy that I could go grab one of my controllers since I did have an extra one. Luckily, I was just a 5-minute walk away from his house, so I told him I was going to be right back. I just wish I would have had Billy go with me. As I'm arriving home, I noticed something that was a bit off. One of the windows was slightly open ajar. Well, that was funny because nobody was home. I mean, it was a couple of days before Christmas, but my parents weren't getting any time off until the following evening. This was why I assumed my mom and dad were home. So having full confidence, I unlocked the door, head inside and go to my room. But what I see was the creepiest thing in my life. There, spray painting my room, was my ex. "What are you doing in my room, Mari? You're not supposed to be here," I told her. She just looked at me with glazed eyes. The room's walls were filled with various love messages, and there was a teddy bear on the bed with a knife. Well, before I got a chance to move, she grabs that knife, and she starts to lunge at me. I manage to move out of the way, but that's not before she actually scrapes me in the arm, causing a nasty wound. Thankfully, I was able to get the knife away, and I booked it out of there. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why not stand your ground? I would have, but clearly with a weapon involved and how unstable she was acting, I wasn't going to take my chances and get stabbed in the neck or something. Plus, it might have had to do with my 19-year-old self being so naive. As I jump out the front door, my parents are actually just walking out of their car with a bunch of Christmas gifts. My mom freaks out seeing that I was cut, and my dad quickly heads inside, but sadly my ex-girlfriend had gotten away. I guess she had jumped out the back window or something. Anyway, because we have security cameras set up, we were able to present enough evidence to the police department, where in the end I got a restraining order. I also took a trip to the hospital to get some stitches, and that was pretty much the end. She never did show up into my life again, nor did she ever break into my house either, and we spent Christmas over at my aunt's house. By the way, I never went back to Billy's house that night, but I did call him letting him know the situation and that I was okay. Edit. I forgot to include this, but we did go snowboarding the following week for New Year's. As for my ex-girlfriend, she never contacted me, nor did I ever see her again. This was around 4 years ago. I was in the ninth grade and I was home alone on Christmas break. I lived in a relatively small town in Colorado and lived in a middle-class neighborhood. I recall it was around 7 p.m. and both my mom and dad had been out doing some last-minute Christmas shopping. As for myself, I remember very well I was watching SpongeBob as I sat next to the fireplace with my cat. Anyway, with the sound of rain hitting the pavement just outside, I was startled by what sounded like a knock on my back door. Now, any normal person would choose to knock at the front door. This was why I found that knocking quite bizarre. So I go to investigate nonetheless, but I see the backyard is empty. Now I did notice, however, that the automatic lights had been activated, which meant there had to have been some sort of movement. But try as I did to find the source of that movement, I failed. Well, I tell myself I was just hearing things, so I return to my SpongeBob marathon. I want to say it's another 15 minutes that go by, and this time there's a light knocking at my front door. I ignored it at first, until my cat got up and started clawing at said door. At this point, I am starting to get a bit unnerved. So not really knowing what I should do, I head over to the kitchen and grab the largest kitchen knife I could find. I then return to the living room, where I hear a voice. Open the door. Please, I need to come inside. And the voice sounded very strange. There was this almost sarcastic tone that made me feel as if they were lying. But me being dumb and naive, I opened the front door. Now just so we get one thing straight, we do have a screen door, so it's not like whoever was out there could just make their way in just like that. Anyway, standing on my front porch was this very skinny and tall lady. She had long black hair covering her face, old clothing, and I could see what looked like some sort of knife in her left hand. Hey, can I help you? I said back nervously, trying to make sense of the scene that laid before me. You're by yourself, aren't you? Let me in. I'll keep you company, the woman responded. I'm sorry, I can't do that. I'm going to need you to leave. I couldn't even finish the sentence because, all of a sudden, she lets out this high-pitched scream that caused me to put my hands against my ears. How dare you speak to me like that? Let me inside, she said as she began slashing the front screen door. Oh heck no, I tell myself. I immediately locked the front door on her and now I head over to the kitchen to grab the house phone. Bear in mind, I still didn't have a cell phone at the time, which meant I would have to call for help the old-fashioned way. Hello, 911, what's your emergency? Hi, there's somebody outside my house, and they're trying to break in. I think something's wrong with her, however, because she's acting really weird. Okay, police are on their way. In the meantime, can you go and hide somewhere, like a restroom or closet? Sadly, this was a corded phone, which meant I would have to leave the comforting voice of the operator, something I chose not to do, as I could hear the lady outside continue to pound the windows. After what seemed like an eternity, however, but was really like 7 minutes, the operator told me officers were outside my house. So I hang up, look out the window, and sure enough, there are 2 police officers approaching my house. Once I was with them, I explained my situation as well as give them a description to which they told me they would patrol the neighborhood. They found her 10 minutes later trying to break into somebody's car. When I later heard more details, I learned she was a homeless woman and she had been intoxicated, which explained the way she was acting that night. Anyway, my parents arrived no more than 20 minutes after officers left, and let's just say I had to explain to them why a bunch of our window screens had been slashed. They were eventually fixed, but it sure was quite a creepy start to my Christmas break. By the way, the rest of it went by uneventfully, apart from my dad installing some security cameras, as well as a security alarm system. So this took place a couple of winters ago. It was a very quiet and comfortable Christmas Eve evening, and I was in my house relaxing after working overtime at my job at Costco. For reference, I'm a single 27-year-old male, who lives with one other roommate who had just left that evening to go to his work. Keeping me company that night was my pet cat Oreo, who's pretty much like my son. Oreo and I were in my bedroom, approximately 7 p.m., and I was binge watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure on the new 4K television I'd purchased for Christmas. I was also munching on some delicious pizza I'd ordered from work. If anyone out there has never had Costco pizza, I hate to say it, but you're definitely missing out. Anyway, at around 9 p.m., snow falling outside and the temperature dropping into the upper teens, I got up and went into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, as well as to throw away the pizza box. This was when I heard the undeniable sounds of footsteps walking around my backyard and heading toward the right side, where my roommate's room is located. I found the noise quite bizarre. Pardon the JoJo pun. So I take a peek through the kitchen window. I didn't see anything at first, but as I paid more attention, I can clearly see a tall dark figure disappearing behind the side wall. I got the chills and I start making my way down the hallway so that I could get a better look at whoever might be out there through another window. At the end of the hallway, I can see Oreo with all the hair on his back standing straight up. He's scratching at my roommate John's bedroom door and letting out a hiss that pretty much told me he was ready to mess somebody up. As I reached for the door handle, I heard something that made me go numb. The window was moving. Slowly, I made my way back toward my bedroom, making sure to grab Oreo along the way, and then he began to throw a fit and even scratched my arm in the process. But he didn't do it because he's mean. He did it because he was trying to warn me. I now went ahead and turned off all the lights in my room, locked the door, hiding behind my bed with a baseball bat, and got on the phone with 911. That call, which honestly felt like an eternity, was interrupted when I can hear the door handle begin to budge. Again, I remind you I'm a 27-year-old male, 6 foot, 190 pounds, but that still doesn't mean I'm disqualified from being scared. After all, how am I to know if this person that broke in didn't have a gun with them? So after about 20 seconds of the door handle budging, it stops, but then the kicking begins. Yeah, you heard that right. The kicking. Open the door or I'll force my way in, I recall hearing the man say through the door, being muffled by what sounded like some sort of mask. I know I shouldn't have said anything, but I yelled out that the police were on their way and that he needed to leave. However, it doesn't seem like he cared, and all I could think of in that moment was whether or not the door was going to hold. Oreo continued to hiss and act very aggressively, and after another minute or two, I can hear police sirens coming down the neighborhood. I now heard the home intruder curse at me as I then hear his footsteps, in a frantic manner, storm out of my house, only for the cops to yell at him to get on the ground. Fast forward a few minutes later and the operator now tells me on the phone that it's safe to step outside. I did, and I met with one of the police officers who told me that they ended up finding a knife on the home intruder, which instantly made the cold from that evening seem like nothing compared to that chilling discovery. As far as I could tell, nothing was taken, and this seemed to have just been a one-time incident. Safe to say, I ended up calling my roommate John, who found the whole incident absolutely frightening. And let's just say I didn't get any sleep for the rest of that night. Although, could you really blame me? What a way to celebrate Christmas, am I right? This happened last year in late November. As Christmas was just a month away, I wanted to begin decorating earlier. My husband and I have always been the couple that will wait until last minute, but I made it my mission to initiate the festivities sooner, as well as the decorations. Therefore, I did need decorations. So I went to my local Michael's craft store to pick up some artificial snow globes, Christmas lights, and other little Christmas souvenirs and ornaments. But now we needed the piece of resistance, the Christmas tree. Luckily, there is a Target in the other shopping center that has a lot with Christmas trees for sale, so I went ahead and made the 2-minute drive over and find a parking spot next to an ATM machine. I needed some extra money anyway. Now to add, my husband was at home and was unaware of my holiday shopping spree. Unfortunately, it's sad to say, what should have been an evening of walking around aisles of pine trees / Christmas trees, taking in the cold air and music, would turn into my worst nightmare. Since this wasn't a Wednesday, the parking lot the Christmas trees are set up in was relatively quiet. I counted 5 people looking at trees, as the majority of parked vehicles belong to those shopping at Target. but no problem for me as I start to walk around, while an employee comes up to me and asks if I needed any assistance. After about 5 minutes of walking and inspecting, I found a little Christmas tree that was just calling my name. So I get an employee, and after a quick purchase and setup, they help me with getting the tree inside the back of my vehicle. But here's when things would get creepy. Once the employees returned back to the lot of trees, I sat in my car calling my mom and asking her if she needed anything. I figured since I'm already out, I'd just ask her. Well, as I'm there talking to my mother, I am unaware that somebody is looking at me from the other side of my vehicle, parked to my left. I only happen to see them when in my peripheral vision I see the flash of a camera. I look and there's this really weird man looking at me with one of the creepiest smiles I'd ever seen. Now I tried my best to ignore him as I now start to back up and begin the way back home, but unfortunately it seemed that this stranger wasn't finished with me just yet, since he started to follow me even out of the parking lot. It wasn't until I reached the first intersection and made a right that I knew for a fact that I was being followed. So I started to get pretty freaked out. Thus, I ended up calling my husband and advising him of my predicament. He instructed me that I start making turns at lights coming up. If I do this 4 times or so and he's still behind me, then my suspicions are correct. Well, to absolutely no one's surprise, he continued to follow me, and it's at this point I get the brilliant idea of driving to the police station. I'll meet you there, and if he tries anything, he's in for quite the surprise, my husband told me. I stood on the line with my husband until I arrived at the police station, but when I looked back into my rearview mirror, the creep was nowhere to be seen. So I sighed a breath of relief as I met up with my husband and I finally started to relax. Now fast forward a couple of weeks later, it's closer to Christmas and I'm at my job, a Sprouts grocery store. I was on my lunch break sitting at one of the benches we have outside looking at my phone when I felt the table suddenly move. I looked up thinking it was going to be either a coworker or a customer taking a break, and what I saw sent absolute shivers down my spine. It was that same man from a couple of weeks ago, the one that was following me and who took pictures of me. Memories of being chased that evening started to now rush in my head as he began inching his way closer to me ever so maniacally. It's like he knew what he was doing and was very weird and creepy, but it's like he didn't care. As I got up, he grabs my arm and then pulls me closer to him. He then proceeds to whisper in my ear and say, "Why do you have to play so hard to get? Bad things happen to the people who ignore me." I screamed like a banshee as the man now starts telling me to be quiet. He's now beginning to act nervous, however. Thank the heavens above, he lets go of me as a male customer walks over and begins asking this creep what he was doing. He just ran into the parking lot and I stood there in a loss of words. I then started to have a breakdown as the customer manages to wave down one of my coworkers. She was able to consult me in the back room, and it was at this point I finally explained my ordeal. We called the cops, but they told me that there wasn't much they could do unless they could actually find him. Unfortunately, they never did, but that was also the last time I had seen him. Oh yeah, and my husband ended up getting me a taser for Christmas, and I also started attending self-defense courses a couple of weeks later. Nothing else like this has ever happened to me again, but if it ever does, I'm going to be well prepared. Last winter, I was invited by my best friend Hanamaru to spend Christmas with her and her family in Kyoto, Japan. You bet I said yes as soon as she finished her sentence. I'd always wanted an excuse to travel to the land of the rising sun, but I never really took the opportunity to do it, mainly because I didn't have a place I could stay. I could have chosen a hotel, mind you, but that would have been costly. Anyway, for some brief context, I'm female, 23 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas. I met Hanamaru earlier that year in January as part of a school club, and we still talk to this day. She's actually helping me write this story so that I remember all the details. At any rate, in total I stayed in Kyoto for 2 weeks, celebrating Christmas and the welcome of 2020, the new year. It's just a shame we had all these high hopes for the second decade of the millennium, but as we've seen, it turned out to be pretty scary. So anyway, it was Christmas evening, roughly 7:30 p.m. Hanamaru had taken me to a park near her house that had a well-known lake people like to go to. It's here people like to feed the ducks, something I enjoy doing back at home. When we made the short 10-minute journey to the park, it was empty, apart from the one man who was walking his dog. Hanumaru and I found a bench near a tree and then we proceeded to take a seat. I then took out the bag of lettuce we brought in our little backpack and the ducks started to walk over. For the next 15 or so minutes, Hanumaru and I are sitting there, talking, laughing, getting a kick at the ducks acting silly, and enjoying some Christmas music we had playing over on our iPod. At some point in our conversation, I did notice something that raised an eyebrow. As to not make a big deal, I told Hanamaru to look ahead of us and then to the right at one of the trees that's next to a city lamp on the other side of the small park. She too notices a strange man who is just standing there staring at us from behind that tree I mentioned. He quickly hid behind it, as if to say he got caught red-handed, before moments later walking in the other direction and then crossing the street. Don't forget him, by the way, as he's going to play an important part of this retelling. Both Hanumaru and I found him to be pretty creepy, but we quickly put him behind our head as we focused back to our conversation. Fast forward a little bit later, we look at the time and it's now approaching 9 p.m. Hanumaru's mom texted her and let her know that she had some tea and biscuits waiting for us in the kitchen. So we both jumped up in excitement as we packed up our things, and we began making the short walk back home. Now, in between the park and Hanamaru's neighborhood, we had to walk down this block where the lighting is pretty questionable. What I mean is that there aren't many street lamps, just homes where every other household had a little porch light. Definitely not something you might see in a busy city back in the States. Anyway, we're in this portion of the walk, talking about what we were going to do on New Year's, when we began to notice we were being followed. Now, here's the scary part. We realized it was the same creeper we had seen at the park a little bit earlier. Looking back, we truly believe that he never actually left the immediate area, but instead he must have been watching our every movement from the cover of darkness. Hanumaru and I started to pick up our pace, and as we turned the corner of a street, we can no longer see the man. So we began letting out a breath of relief, but continuing the walk faster, thinking that he might still turn the corner, but he never did, and it seemed that we were now in the clear. But then, as we're about to enter Hanamaru's neighborhood, I let out a sudden yelp when I look to my right and see the man running in our direction from an alleyway. However, that's not what caused me to scream. The knife he now had. Hanumaru and I booked it before he could exit the alleyway, and we ended up hiding behind a couple of trees as we didn't want to reveal where Hanumaru's house was, in fear he might try to break in. Hanumaru and I watched in complete disbelief as the man made his way down the street, his head turning in every direction, as if looking for us, his so-called prey. Thank God that a car turned the corner and entered the neighborhood, because that caused the man to quickly hide his knife in his jacket and then started to walk in the other direction. This was our opportunity to book it back to Hanamaru's house. When we got inside, we bumped into Hanamaru's dad, and we spent the next minute trying our best to get our story relayed to him. Well, it was mainly Hanamaru, since my Japanese isn't exactly the best, and after he heard a decent amount of the story, we called the Japanese authorities. It's unfortunate to reveal, however, that they never caught the man, as he ended up getting away. For the rest of the vacation, we never went out again at night, unless it was with Hanamaru's family. Nothing else creepy did occur after that, and I made it back home on January the 10th, just in time to start the new semester. I can't believe how fast this year flew. So much happened that it honestly feels like it was just a bad dream. Yet here we are. Here's to hoping we can all have a wonderful and peaceful Christmas with our families and friends. Speaking of Christmas, I got a story to tell from the year 1996, about the time I stopped the real-life Grinch. I was a young 30 years old at the time, married with 2 kids, aged 7 and 5 respectively. I worked as a security guard for a refinery, and during the holiday season, I was on the clock almost 12 hours a day, 6 times a week. It was a rough stretch, but at least I was guaranteed to have Christmas with the family. I did, however, have to come in for Christmas Eve, a shame as I tried really hard to get the day off, but they really needed me. On the bright side, the check I got was absolutely incredible. Anyway, I got off of work at around 11 p.m. Christmas Eve, and I called my wife from my office to ask her if the kids were already in bed. You see, in order to hide the gifts, I left them locked in the back of my trunk, so as to not have the kids find them. I would then put the gifts under the Christmas tree when I got home. My wife advises me that they had gone to bed at around 8 p.m. and she was currently watching television in our bedroom. Fast forward to when I got home. A light rain had just begun falling, and the sound of crickets chirping could be heard throughout the neighborhood. My wife welcomed me with a hug and a kiss on the cheek and handed me a cup of hot cocoa that she prepared minutes earlier. I took a few sips as I changed into my pajamas, and then I grabbed my umbrella so I could start grabbing the gifts. In case you're wondering, I have two boys, and I had gotten them the Nintendo 64, something they made well known to Santa Claus when they saw him at the mall. I also got them some clothes, but you know kids, they care more about the toys and the games and less about the clothing. At any rate, I grabbed the Nintendo 64 first from the back of my vehicle and placed it behind the Christmas tree. As I get up, my lower back sore from being at my desk all day, I feel my stomach begin to tingle. I had to use the restroom, and badly. So I quickly rushed over to the restroom that was upstairs, since the one downstairs was having an issue with the toilet at the time, and I start to do my thing. 2 minutes later, I exit the restroom and I start heading toward the staircase. Just to quickly highlight the building of my home, you can see all of my living room from the second-story railings. This means that I got a surprise when I peeked down into the dark and quiet living room, which was illuminated only by the Christmas tree. Here was when I saw a tall, chunky figure rummaging through the gifts and putting them into a bag. My wife was a small 5'2", 105 pounds, and unless she had dressed up in some huge costume, it wouldn't explain the presence that I was currently seeing. In my head, I started telling myself I should go and grab the shotgun, but first I checked up on my wife and kids. I tiptoed towards the kids' bedroom, which is also on the second story, and my wife is sitting there next to a lamp, reading a book. My eyes went as wide as the sun, as my wife begins asking me why I had such a look of concern and why I was acting so paranoid. I told her to keep quiet and I locked the door until I tell her otherwise to unlock it. She had no clue what I was talking about, but I think she got the idea since she didn't question me either. I now went into our bedroom, grabbed the shotgun, and head back toward the stairs. Here's when I get a better look at him as he's making his way up. It's a man, mid-40s, long greasy hair with a scruffy beard, holding a knife. I yelled at the top of my lungs, "Get out of my house, now!" Clearly realizing it stepped into the wrong household, he nopes down the stairs and then out the front door. I followed him out and I watched as he disappeared into a nearby alleyway. After that, I quickly locked the front door, and then I proceeded to call the cops to advise them of the home intruder. All the while, my kids and wife were asking what had just happened. I told them that the Grinch had broken in and he was trying to steal the toys, but I scared him off and he went back to his village. It did calm the kids down a bit, and they got a good laugh out of it, but the look on my wife's face pretty much said it all. She was asking me how he even got in there. That could be put on me. As I was focused on grabbing the gifts and then using the restroom, I had left the front door wide open. It's just crazy that in those moments, some random creep, who looking back was most likely staking out her home, saw an opportunity to break in. However, as you learned, breaking into my home and trying to steal was a really bad idea. Unfortunately, however, that man, or Grinch as I call him, got away. But on the bright side, he never did return. We ended up living at that home for another wonderful 4 years, before we ended up moving to another state. Since then, the life has been very peaceful. This actually is a story that comes from my grandmother back when she was living in Mexico. She's currently living here with me, my mom and dad in the US, and she's never been happier. But this entry will be coming from her perspective, but of course I'll be the one writing it out for her. So this happened to her on Christmas Day of 2007. It was a tradition of hers to make tamales and pozole for neighbors on Christmas Day, and that year was no different. She at the time was living with my grandfather, but he was in town that day taking care of some business for his ranch. By mid-afternoon, my grandmother finally had finished making food, and she was sitting in her living room watching some telenovelas. My grandpa still hadn't returned at that point. Well, considering that my grandparents are old-fashioned and left the doors unlocked, my grandma expected to see my grandpa when she heard somebody enter through the kitchen. She got up, but then stopped in place when she sees this random middle-aged man staring back at her. Nothing really stood out about him, and at first she thought that maybe perhaps he was a drunk and might have entered the wrong home on mistake. The man stared at my grandmother for a few more seconds before he tells her that he needs to use her phone and that she is to remain quiet. My grandma was hesitant about his demands, but she's a sweetheart, thus she allowed him to make a call. My grandma then next describes that the man told somebody on the phone that he had just completed the task that he was assigned and that he was needing to be picked up. Just imagine hearing something like that. Well, my grandma decided to offer the man some food and even a drink and head to the kitchen, but all of a sudden the man's behavior changes. He takes out a gun from his jacket and then tells my grandmother not to make any sort of movements or leave his sight. She stood there completely frozen, thinking that this was the day that she was going to meet her maker on Christmas Day. But thank the Lord that the man never acted upon his threat, as he puts the gun away and tells my grandmother that he was never here, not to tell the cops of his sudden arrival. My grandmother agreed, before the man continued to stare in her direction and then toward the front window. This was back and forth, with the man reminding my grandma not to run, as he stood there for what seemed like ages, but was only about 5 minutes. Eventually, my grandmother recalls seeing a car pull up to her house, and the man steps out, but not before saying something that she'll never forget to this day. "Thank you for cooperating with what I said. Otherwise, I was going to kill you." The man then exits her house, gets into the getaway vehicle, and is never seen nor heard from again. My grandma, as you would expect, was not only scared, but confused of why the man chose her house of all places to make a phone call. What was the deal with completing his task? While considering he was armed with a gun, it couldn't have been any good. My grandpa would later arrive about 20 minutes later after the incident, and they did go to the police. However, they really didn't do anything. Anyway, that's pretty much my grandma's scary story, an experience that never leaves her mind, and it's a reminder to her that anything can happen in your life. Over the years, I've had some situations where I've had to deal with creeps and freaks. It's a shame, and unless you've been in a similar situation, then you just don't really know how it feels. The best way I can explain encountering creepy people is almost the sense of disbelief. I mean, you're taught stranger danger growing up, and you do see things in movies and TV shows, but in real life? No way, right? Well, as December is upon us, I was reminded of one experience in particular from when I used to work at a video rental store. Yeah, they don't really exist these days. They're very rare and hard to come by. With that said, let me go back to a while ago when they were more common. I'm talking Christmas Eve of 2008. The Nintendo Wii had just launched a couple of years before, and even up to that point, we were getting lots of kids and families who would come to rent Nintendo Wii games, alongside Christmas classics. I was working that morning. Luckily, I was being given time and a half, rare for such a small family-owned video rental store. I was also fortunate that we would be closing at around 2 p.m., so I didn't have to worry about being there the whole entire day. Everything was pretty calm at the store, some decent light foot traffic at the start, but about an hour before closing I was really starting to get anxious, not only because I wanted to already go home, step into the shower, and then enjoy some amazing food later that night, but there is this homeless man who kept entering and exiting the store. I wasn't sure what his issue had been. I wasn't trying to judge him whatsoever, but something about his presence just gave me these really bad vibes. Again, I wasn't trying to be a jerk nor look down on his circumstances. Most homeless people are actually pretty chill. But yeah, when I asked him if he needed anything, on one of the times he came into the store, he just walked up to me and said that he had everything that he needed to see. At first I wasn't sure what he meant for a couple of seconds, but when I caught him staring at my chest, I knew exactly what he was referring to. Typical creep, but so far nothing super scary. I told him at this moment that he needed to leave as he was being a disturbance, and this is when he says no. And not just any ordinary no, one that was then followed by the words you would expect out of that one episode of SpongeBob, Sailor Mouth, without all the dolphin sounds of course. I don't know why that came to mind right now, but it was hilarious, so I'm including it in my write-up. Anyway, after cursing me out and just standing there trying to hold back my anger, he leans forward to me, changing his demeanor from angry to calm, and then whispers, "You can make it up to me by spending some time with me in the back room of yours." I would rather not use the same words he said, so I can try to keep this entry PG, but I was pretty much taken aback. I now had enough, so I told him I was calling the authorities, and then again his anger returns. The little displays on my countertop, with some DVDs, popcorn bags, and candy, stand no chance as he then pushes them over and starts to lunge at me. I pretty much booked it out of the store, seeing as he was now chasing me down, and I run next door to where there's a Vons. Just imagine this college girl screaming like a lunatic as I'm being chased by a random homeless man who says he was going to have his way with me one way or another. Not exactly exciting. Thanks to some good Samaritans who came over to us, the homeless man yet again another time changes his demeanor as he tells the people that we were related and that he was just playing a game with me. Obviously nobody believed his lie. The man pretty much just turned back, tucked his tail between his legs so to speak, and runs outside of the Vons. Talk about a crazy experience for sure. So I ended up calling the owner meanwhile, and some people from the Vons kept me company. I closed up the store just fine that afternoon, and I remember my manager telling me that he would make sure the homeless man wouldn't be a bother to me ever again. I saw him for what I remember, maybe a week after the incident, but he never entered the store nor got anywhere near me. After that week, he was gone. Hopefully he ended up realizing his mistakes and pursuing a normal life. But who knows? One can just hope, right? One of the most exciting parts about growing up in a large family was the holiday season. Christmas was the main event of the year where the entire family meets up at my grandma's house, and us kids get flooded with endless amounts of gifts from all the adults. Aunts, uncles, grandpas, grandmas, friends of the family, yeah, the whole 9 yards. It wouldn't be surprising to go back home with at least a couple of $100s in her pockets, and a large bag of toys and action figures to accompany it. That still didn't count the gifts that were waiting for us back at home. Trust me, there were plenty. Man, I miss those simpler times back in the early 2000s. Why can't life be like that again? Maybe that's just my nostalgia speaking. Speaking of which, seeing as it's Christmas season, why not share this scary experience from one of our Christmas parties? This was back in that time period that always gets talked about between me and my cousins, anytime that we get together. Yeah, we still do it today. It's just that now we're all adults and we have our own kids. Anyway, this one Christmas party, it's the whole shebang I mentioned just a few moments ago. You have me, my little brother Timothy, and all the cousins too, around 20 of them. We were all around 10 to 13 years old, still making us the kinds of kids who like to go out and play. That's why I recall us doing later in the evening once more, and family were starting to arrive at my grandma's house. She lived in a really nice area in northern Kentucky with a large field behind her house. I want to say it was roughly 7 p.m. It's quite chilly outside, and we're all in the middle of a game of soccer. That's when I recall one of my cousins kicking the ball a little too hard toward me. I was the goalie. This caused the ball to roll into the nearby set of woods. Did I forget to mention there was that too? It's what separated my grandma's house from a couple of the other neighbors. Well, okay, maybe it's not really considered a set of woods per se, as it's not that wide nor long, but it is enough to where you can't see if somebody or someone might be hiding there. In any case, I give chase to the ball and soon realize I can't see jack diddly squat. Figures as much. Now, this was a time when cell phones weren't really available, so having a small pocket flashlight to light your way up wasn't going to happen. Well, I had to go back and tell my cousins we needed to grab a flashlight. The oldest one heads to retrieve it as I stood there with my back against all the trees, looking at the rest of my family, which is running around and telling them to be patient. Gotta love the younger ones who can't wait. Moments after I turned my back, I ended up hearing the sounds of tree branches breaking, and even what sounds like somebody breathing heavily. It did frighten me for a bit, and I took a step back, but I calmed down once I tell myself I'm over-imagining everything. Moving forward, my cousin arrives within the minute and we now try again. I shine the flashlight and it reflects off of the trees, and it's only a few seconds after that we see him. There standing behind a tree, no kidding, was this random man with one of the most angriest looks across his face. This was the kind of expression that read, "I'm going to kill you," or maybe something like, "Hey, I was sleeping. Why did you wake me up? Now you're going to pay." His presence alone would have been kind of okay, but what really turned the situation south was my oldest cousin and I see the guy holding onto a hatchet. Suddenly, the man started screaming a bunch of random nonsense, and he said that he was being chased by interdimensional beings, and he claimed that we were going to take him away. Yeah, it was really scary, not going to lie, especially when he said he was going to kill us and then began to get closer. That's why we immediately start to run and tell everyone to start doing the same thing. The adults are caught off guard, no surprise there. But luckily my dad and some of my uncles take a couple of the rifles in the house and set up a perimeter around the home. You should have seen the change in the atmosphere. One moment there's this loud music and everyone's having fun. Next thing you know, it's as quiet as the middle of the desert, and we're all whispering, wondering who might be out there. Cops were informed, and after a short search, they do find the man with a hatchet hiding behind my grandma and grandpa's shed. As it so happened, he was identified as one of the neighbor's oldest sons, who I guess was on heavy drugs that evening. He also just so happened to be out that night, walking about in that tree line looking for what we learned were so-called interdimensional beings. Luckily, nobody was hurt that evening. However, it didn't stop some of the nightmares I had nights after. We laugh about it now, and maybe that is a little bit mean, but please don't go around taking hardcore drugs and threatening kids with a hatchet. It's going to get you into lots of trouble with law enforcement, and your parents too. It's Christmas Day 2009 in southern Louisiana. My little brother and I spend the whole entire morning opening up Christmas gifts, drinking hot cocoa and watching movies with our parents, just enjoying the overall feeling of happiness and comfort. After spending the majority of the day lazying around, my brother and I decided to test out the new bicycles we were gifted, and we head out on a ride across town. We rode by our school, the park, the town square, and even by the ice rink we had just been at a couple of nights before with some friends. After riding around for approximately 40 minutes, my brother and I come up with the idea of going back home using a trail that shoots you out just a few blocks from where we lived. It was often here we walked our dog on the weekend and even after school. Now, as expected, the trail was empty, and those few miles of riding down the dirt trail with the wind pressing against our cheeks felt so relaxing and wholesome. On the last stretch of the trail, my brother and I decided to take a quick break and take some pictures by a tiny lake where there's some ducks. I always liked ducks, and so we tried calling out to some like we were some sort of duck whisperers, as we failed miserably and we made fools of ourselves. Unfortunately, however, it seemed our calls were answered by not just someone, but a group of someones who apparently had no interest in our shenanigans. Out stepped three disheveled men from behind a large set of bushes, who looked to have seen their better days. Their clothing looked as if it was about to fall apart, being filled with stains and holes. Their hair was messy and nappy too. The best way I can describe his look would be Braun Strowman, for those of you who know who he is. He has those same beady eyes and long beard with hair in a ponytail. He was also ginormous, easily towering over me, my brother, and the other two strangers. Immediately something seemed off about the three, as we can see they had been smoking out of a glass pipe, most likely some sort of drug. My brother and I apologize for the interruption, and we now start to walk away from them, heading toward the opposite side of the little lake. but we ended up hearing one of them curse at us and say that it was going to kill us for interrupting them, and I quote, he said their play session. What that meant, we weren't exactly sure, but it most likely had to do with the drugs. Anyway, we were sent packing, if you will, because one of the guys actually had the nerve and audacity to pull out a revolver and point it in our direction. Thank God, however, it seemed as if there was no bullets in there, as they never did fire it. But I can't tell you how scary it feels to have a gun pointed at you like that. Sure, we were quite a bit of a ways from where they were standing, but that bullet could have easily have traveled pretty quickly and hit either my brother or I. Needless to say, we got back on our bicycles and immediately rode back home, calling 911 in the process. Cops were sent out there to investigate, and from what I recall, they did arrest one of them for being in possession of a firearm, as well as illegal substances. We have since never encountered those three ever again, which is a good thing. But that still doesn't stop me from looking back every year and thinking about the time that my brother and I could have possibly bit the dust while out on a bicycle ride on Christmas afternoon. In the traditional sense, this might not be under the category of scary. However, as it was still something pretty insane, and it did happen on Christmas a couple of years ago, I wanted to share it with you anyway. It's a sad reminder in today's society where people have no respect for other people's belongings. It was 2019, and on Christmas Day, I decided to go visit my cousin who was working at Starbucks that morning. It was a tradition that up to that point I had done for 2 years straight. He was very happy to see me as he was unable to make it to the Christmas Eve party we'd thrown the night before. After taking my order and talking to him in between customers, I went to sit outside so I could enjoy the nice chilly morning and my warm cup of coffee. I brought my laptop with me as well, and I took the time to do some online shopping with the gift cards I had been gifted the night before. It was no more than 20 minutes of sitting there, the Starbucks having a decent amount of people, that I began to notice somebody going up to the tables and asking for money. I was familiar with the homeless man in particular. He was notorious for getting into fights with people, and one time when I was at the Starbucks, that same exact one, police actually had arrived to break up an altercation between him and another customer. I tried not to pay attention to him since there were other people around me. However, when he came up to my table, I started to get this really bad feeling. I asked him what he wanted, and he just stared at me as if I was speaking in another language. It was very uncomfortable, to be honest. But then in one quick motion, he grabs my phone, which was lying next to my laptop, and had my earphones plugged into them, and takes off running. That's not, of course, without pretty much ripping the earphones right out of my head. That actually did hurt a little bit. Well, great. I was being robbed. This sudden event was about to escalate as the man who was sitting at the table next to me got up and gave chase to this creep. I saw as he pretty much speared the guy down to the ground, with the phone included. I caught up to both of them as some other people are now walking over, and what happens next was very chilling. I guess it's the part that is a bit scary to this story. The homeless man puts his hand into one of his trench coat pockets and then struggles to get something out. But seeing this, the good Samaritan who had tried to grab the phone back now focuses his attention to that arm, and he does get a hold of it. It's a good thing he did, because what we found out was in that pocket gave us chills. A knife. Thankfully, he wasn't able to use it, and when cops got there, they did end up arresting him and taking him away. I was given my phone back. However, the screen got cracked. A bit of a shame, but it's a material object. So anyway, maybe this isn't the scariest thing coming from my perspective, but it must have been a lot more frightening for my new friend. As a word of advice, if you're going to go to public locations, especially nowadays, make sure to leave your expensive things at home. Also, it might be better not to be a hero. You might get seriously hurt. Remember, material objects are replaceable, but not you. Is it really the end of the year already? Where did it go? One moment it's January and I'm taking down Christmas lights. Next thing I know, my husband and I are putting them back up as we enter December. It's a great time to spread cheer and be with the family as you look back on all you accomplished. Maybe even do some volunteering at the local homeless shelter, or adopt a family's Christmas list who doesn't have much money to buy their kids gifts. I guess anything really to spread some joy, right? Those are just some of the positives. Looking back, however, has reminded me of the real-life trauma I faced 10 years ago on Christmas Eve that even today still haunts me. Now at the time, I was 28 years old, and I was 5 months pregnant with our first daughter. We were living in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, on some farmlands that never got any traffic. Neighbors were quite spread apart, and it was very rare you heard any humans unless you actually drove into town. It's here there's a huge Walmart where you see pretty much everyone. Really a gathering spot, if you will, if it wasn't Sunday and we weren't at church. Speaking of church, my husband that evening, it being Christmas Eve, was at our local church's small festival they were holding in the parking lot, dressed up as Santa Claus, helping some of the locals give out gifts to families, as well as feeding them as well. Meanwhile, I was at home making food for when he would return. I remember specifically I was making his favorite turkey dinner with some stuffing, mashed potatoes and gravy, and some apple pie. At around 9 p.m., my husband gave me a call and said that he was on his way home and he would be there in approximately 10 or so minutes. He also asked if I could go ahead and unlock the back door so he could just step in really quickly. It was raining that evening, and considering he didn't have an umbrella, he didn't want to get soaked and possibly sick. It made sense. So I got up from the kitchen chair, where I sat watching some YouTube videos, and I make my way over to unlock said door. Fast forward a few minutes after, and I head toward the restroom so that I could brush my teeth, seeing as I was about ready to head to bed anyway. I just needed to warm up my husband's food. Footsteps were soon heard coming from my kitchen, and part of me jumped for joy thinking, yay, hubby is back, and I don't have to be all alone. Bear in mind, I also heard the sound of a car door closing just outside my house moments prior. With teeth washed and hands cleaned with warm soap and water, I step into the hallway where just a mere seconds later, it is made evident to me that something is very wrong. Who I heard enter my home was not my husband, not even something innocent like a neighbor's cat, nor maybe even hopefully just the sound of the wind. No. In my house was not just one, but two home intruders, both dressed up in your traditional burglar's clothing, dressed in all black, with ski masks hiding their identity and expressions. I stood there for about a solid 3 seconds in pure fear, but that felt like an eternity as the two spot me and then start to give me commands. Come over here and don't dare make any sudden movements or call the cops, one of them said. There was just something so hypnotic and calming about their voices that almost made me agree with them. However, I snapped out of it when I can see one of them clearly grasping a handgun, and it's now I make a beeline toward our bedroom. That felt like forever, but now in my room, I feel a little bit safer with this wooden barrier in between us. But what's to stop the two from breaking in there anyway? I nervously thought to myself as I can feel my heart beat out of my chest and sweat begin to fall down my cheeks. That was very possible. Open the door, or we will shoot our way in. I can still clearly remember hearing one of them say, as I remember in that moment, the shotgun that's under our bed, fully loaded and ready to use for emergencies just like this. If these two dared to make their way into my bedroom, both would be shot dead in a matter of seconds, and I would have quite a lot of explaining to do to the police. Not that I would have to, considering these two were the ones who broke into my house to begin with, not vice versa. I'm getting ahead of myself. Using the most intimidating voice I could muster up, I yell at the two that I have a loaded shotgun, and if they dared try to break into my room, I would have no problem shooting them dead. Thank God that by some miracle those words resonated in their heads, because the kicking and knocking they did at the door comes to a halt, and then I heard them both whisper to one another. I don't remember what they said specifically since it was hard to make out what was being said, but I do remember the sound of the footsteps as they are now starting to grow quieter. Less than 30 seconds later, I hear the sound of a car engine start up, and then just a few moments after that, things grew silent, with only the sounds of the rain hitting the roof above. I let out a small breath of relief, but I was still sweating bullets as I then reached for my phone and called my husband. He's absolutely caught off by surprise, and I'm asking him where in the world he was, since it seemed that he was running late. He tells me that he was helping out an elderly couple, but was now just about to turn the corner to enter a long driveway. My husband did tell me that he saw a black unmarked SUV as it drove past him. Apparently, it was in quite the hurry, and he asked if I knew who it might have been. I was breathing so heavily and hyperventilating like crazy that I struggled to get the necessary description out to him that the house was just broken into by a couple of burglars. Anyway, my husband, who's still dressed up as good old Saint Nick, called the cops for me, and once they got there, I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief, at least a little bit. Unfortunately, it does suck to inform all of you that those two who broke into my house have since to this day never been brought to justice, and I don't know their identities, nor their true motives. Though, do we really need to know their motives? It already seemed that they were up to no good. All they made off with was the jar of money we had in our kitchen, roughly $500 in savings, and of course, my innocence of being home alone. We moved away a couple of years later, and luckily we have never had anything like this happen to us ever again. However, it does suck that I still have to always keep an eye open when I'm sleeping or I'm alone with my daughters, since I do feel like somebody might try to break in at any moment, but I have that comfort of having training in self-defense. We have a lot of guns in the house, 2 large dogs, a security system, and cameras too. In conclusion, don't ever try messing with us, because it's not going to end well for you whatsoever. Edit. Merry Christmas, Creepy Fox, and to everybody who's listening to his videos. Much love to all of you this holiday season. If you were to tell me I was going to have a creepy encounter on Christmas and on vacation of all times, I wouldn't believe you. I mean, how could that be? Well, as you're going to find out, the world isn't safe from creepy people. Not that I should have to tell you that. Let's rewind to the year 2019, winter break. I had decided to head to Anchorage, Alaska to spend the holiday with my cousin Max, alongside my aunt and uncle. Christmas Eve came and we ate like kings and queens, stuffing our faces with turkey and ham. By the next morning, we were thrilled to find a multitude of gifts under our names, some that were shipped to me by my parents, and some from my aunt and uncle. By the way, in case you're wondering why my parents didn't come along, it's because the vacation was my idea. They weren't able to take too much time off of work, and my plan was to stay for over a little 2 weeks. Anyway, by 1 p.m., Max and I had come up with the brilliant idea of going to downtown Anchorage and playing Pokemon Go. You see, I was still really into the game back then, and there was one Pokemon I was seeking that was very hard to find in the real world, Pachirisu, an electric squirrel Pokemon from the 4th generation. For those of you who just got the new Diamond and Pearl remakes, have probably gotten your hands on one already. In Pokemon Go, it's not very easy to get. Pachirisu can only be found in Alaska, the very northern parts of Canada, and the very northern parts of Russia. Being a Southern Californian boy, there was no way I was going to miss my opportunity. So we have my Uncle Chris drive us over to the downtown Anchorage area, and we get dropped off in front of the mall. My uncle tells me that he was going to head to a friend's house to drop off some extra food, and then he would come back to pick us up within an hour. Perfect. With our thermos filled with extra piping hot coffee, we began to walk around downtown Anchorage and started our quest. The first 20 minutes resulted in the typical sightings, albeit with a mix of winter-themed Pokemon that were spawning that year too. No sign of Pachirisu. Such a shame. I started to think that we would have to come back another day at the rate we were going. Thankfully, that wasn't the case because when we circled around back to the little park area that's next to the mall, the game's nearby Pokestops updated, and alas, we were shocked to see 2 nearby Pokestops had updated with a silhouette of Pachirisu. How exciting! I remember jumping for joy like I was a little kid again, and I started to run. But spoiler alert, I ended up slipping on my butt and dropping my coffee on the concrete. Served me right for not remembering the frozen floor in that moment. Luckily, however, I didn't get seriously hurt, but now my coffee was gone. Oh well, we got to the Pokestop in question nonetheless, and we do find our little furry friend. I didn't take any chances, so I gave it a golden raspberry and used an Ultra Ball, and I did a curveball throw as well and got him right away. Nice. What could possibly go wrong now? I got what I came for. Well, when I said there was something scary that happened, here is exactly what happened. Now with my new Pokemon in hand, we began to walk back in the direction that we came from, but all of a sudden, we got interrupted by a lady who was talking random gibberish. It was some sort of weird thing and we had to ask her to repeat herself, but she then started to speak to herself. Well, okay, that's strange. We continued to walk, but then she calls out to us. We stopped for whatever dumb reason, and she now puts her arm around my waist and brings me closer to her. Okay, strange lady I don't know, what's your problem? The lady started to ask us if we wanted to join her and her friends, as they had some extra Christmas gifts and some marijuana. Hey, those were her exact words, not mine. We thanked her for the offer, but we tell her we don't smoke and this seems to upset her. She insists we come follow her and she starts to drag me in the opposite direction. Now, I'm not going to lie with you, she was quite strong for her size. Both my cousin and I are your average ordinary 20-year-olds, about 170 pounds, 5'10" and 5'11" respectively. It's like her strength didn't care about this. Starting to get a bit weirded out, I forced myself out of her grasp and then my cousin and I started to walk away. But moments later we heard behind us as the lady called out to someone. These two behemoths of men come walking out of a nearby alley and then start to come closer. They too start to insist we follow them, and it's at this moment we began to walk faster. Hey, hand over your phones and wallets, one of the men says, as he reveals a pocket knife. I'm not gonna lie to you, that was very unexpected and very unsettling. We start to run as fast as we can, trying not to slip in the process, and as we reach one of the streetlights, we hear somebody from a truck yell at us. We looked over and we saw a man step out of said truck. Was it possible this man was in on the mugging as well? Well, no, luckily this wasn't the case. He was just some random good Samaritan who happened to be in the right place at the right time to give these three a good scare. Needless to say, the three creeps stopped following us and they ran back into a nearby alleyway and disappearing. Served them right for trying to mug us. Fast forward to once the coast is clear and the man in the truck kept us company as I called my uncle to come pick us up. We did talk with the Anchorage Police Department and they told us they would be on the lookout for the three creeps. Meanwhile, if any more details were needed, they would give us a call. That call never came, so we aren't exactly sure what ended up happening with those three. My cousin has told me that he hasn't seen nor heard of anyone in those 2 years that this happened get mugged by three random people in downtown Anchorage, so it's our hope that they have since learned their lesson. 1997, small town in North Carolina. It's approximately a week before Christmas. I'd finally set up some time to start decorating my house. I'd already set up my Christmas tree as well as the stockings and other little ornaments on the inside, but outside the house lacked that extra special magic and joy. So I went to my local Walmart to pick up some cheap Christmas lights and started decorating at about 7 p.m. The night had been still. Neighbors were in their homes relaxing next to their fireplaces. Meanwhile, I was the only one crazy enough to do this last-minute decoration, but I guess that's what I got for procrastinating. Anyway, I was setting everything up when I realized I needed to get some lights from the box, as there was still more than half the roof that needed illumination. The box, by the way, is inside my living room. So when I returned back outside 3 minutes later with a cup of hot cocoa to keep me warm, I saw someone across the street standing there just staring in my direction. He didn't look like any of my neighbors, not that I could really see his face anyway because it's pretty dark, and something about him was giving me really bad vibes. Perhaps it was because he was just there in the darkness, or maybe it was that really lame trench coat that he was wearing. So I tried not to give him much of my attention, as I figured he was just admiring the Christmas lights and was out for an evening walk. Fast forward to around 1 in the morning. I couldn't sleep and I blame it on all the sugar from the hot cocoa. and I'm just laying in bed watching a movie. Out of nowhere, I can hear the shuffling of snow, so I turned the volume down, and at first I thought it was just the sound of nature. I do live near a forest, and at times you do get wildlife frolicking through the night. However, this shuffling sounded heavier, more like that of a human being. I continued to listen for the next 15 to 20 seconds before my paranoia was screaming at me to investigate who or what was outside my home. I grabbed my pistol from my dresser and then slowly made my way to my bedroom window. I peeked through the curtains, but I don't see anything other than the porch light at the side of the house coming on. Strange, but it did confirm I wasn't just imagining the noises and disruption. I now proceeded to walk over to the living room, but I stopped halfway through the hallway when I hear scratching at a window. It was coming from the restroom. I crouched down for whatever reason as I thought this was going to make me invisible, and then I slowly start to tip over to said restroom. This is when I get the shock of the century. I see a figure through the curtains appearing to be cutting the window screen. All the adrenaline in my body was now demanding I open the curtains, and when I did, I couldn't believe my eyes. There is a man with a trench coat. In that moment, I didn't really put two and two together, but I would later realize that it might have very well have been the same man from hours earlier. But let's forget that detail, because to make things worse, he's got a knife, and he's trying to break in from the looks of it. What happens next was actually pure instinct. I raise my pistol, with this dude's face going completely pale, and before I can fire, he does a complete 180, and then I can hear his footsteps make their way into my front lawn. I followed him, but by the time I got outside, he's now long gone. Cops were indeed called, and when I gave them a description of the crazy man, they told me that it matched the profile of somebody that they had been searching for. I guess he was connected to some serious home burglaries in the previous couple of months. He was eventually caught and apprehended, which did give myself and my neighbors quite the relief. But those few weeks of him being at large were some of the most frightening and downright stressful weeks of our lives. It was only just a few months ago that I discovered a genre of YouTube videos where narrators like yourself will recount people's scary stories and encounters. For some reason, I find them to be quite intriguing. It is unfortunate that many others go through some pretty messed up scenarios. Nobody is denying that. Kinda like mine, it's no different. But I guess in a way, telling these stories does sort of help people out, if that makes any sense. It helps in that it teaches people to be very aware of their surroundings and trying not to make the same mistakes as them. Sometimes those of us who experience these things don't always think in that exact moment. It's only until afterwards we start to kick ourselves in the butt and we ask ourselves, why didn't we do something different? That's what my entry is all about. And as I share this with the creepy fox and he narrates my story, I hope those lessons can be passed on to you. So let me go ahead and turn back the clock. 2013, back when I was in college. The semester had just come to a close, and finally I was allowed the time to relax and unwind from so much studying. I remember that semester in particular I was taking all upper level courses, and with 5 jam-packed classes with professors who gave out more homework than the next, it was quite refreshing being able to wake up and just lay in bed and do absolutely nothing. And that's how everything began. On Christmas Eve, I got a call from my best friend. We will call her Zoe. Zoe had called us just to say hello and ask how I was doing and what I was up to. I told her I was going to be hanging out with my family for Christmas Eve, and she tells me that she was going to spend the night watching movies. You see, Zoe didn't really have any family to go to, which was why she was one of the very few students who stayed in the dorms on campus. I felt bad. That was why I asked her if she wanted to join me at my Christmas party and to get away from her dorm room and being so cooped up in there. Zoe thanked me for the offer, but she said she had actually hurt her foot the other day and she was on crutches and wanted to just get some rest on her own. Made sense, which was why I didn't push her anymore, but I knew I just couldn't do nothing. So I told her I would come over before my party and bring her some extra food that she could warm up later on if she wanted to. She sounded really excited with that news, and thus the plan was set. However, there is only one issue. I don't know how to drive. Yeah, I was a late bloomer when it came to driving. I didn't get my license and start driving until I was 24 years old. I was 22 that year. Anyway, I didn't feel like bothering my parents, so I actually decided to take the city bus. That's what I used to get to and from school either way, and since I had a bus pass from school, the bus ride was always free. So there I go. I pack up some extra food, put them in Ziplocs, place them into a bag, and I get going. The bus ride was uneventful, with just a few people riding to their locations. So anyway, I arrive at my usual bus stop, and I take about 10 minutes to walk across the street onto campus and all the way to my friend Zoe's dorm. Zoe was super excited and she couldn't stop thanking me enough. I do recall her pain was settling by the time I arrived, and she told me that she was forever grateful for me coming all the way out there to see her. It wasn't a problem. Fast forward again to another hour later, and the scary encounter was about to happen. I had now bid a good evening to my friend Zoe, and I start to walk back to the bus stop. Luckily, I timed it so I wouldn't have to wait too long. Now, as I pass one of the main buildings near the front entrance of the university, someone randomly just walks out from the corner of my eye. I almost thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, but when I heard a voice, I knew it was the real deal. There was this random man, who from what I remember looked to be just like your average ordinary adult, early to mid-40s, wearing a blue sweater, black pants, some random sneakers, and a receding hairline. He now started to follow me and ask what I was doing on campus and if I had any Christmas plans. I just gave him a quick "I'm heading home right now," and I hoped that was going to be enough to get him off my back, but that didn't happen. He kept following me and started to ask me even more questions. Well, great, here we go, I began to tell myself in my head, as I reached the street light I would need to wait at in order to cross to the bus stop. Want to come back home with me? He ended up saying, just as the light turns red and I'm able to cross. Nah, I don't think so. I'm good. Thanks for the offer, I say in a snarky remark. I now cross, and in those moments it seems like it worked. He had stopped following me, and I say to myself, yes, I can focus back to what I was going to do, getting back home and not being disturbed. Well, that changes, because about 30 seconds after I'd taken a seat at the bus stop, the man starts to approach me again. Ugh, he just doesn't get the message. Leave me alone, pal. That's what's running through my head. Once again, he begins to ask me some more personal questions, and it's at this moment I reach into my purse to grab onto my pepper spray. I wasn't trying to jump to conclusions, but you just never know. No ordinary man is just going to be following you like this and then slowly inching his way closer and closer to you. Now, before I had a chance to react, he all of a sudden gives me a huge hug, and then he says he was cold and wanted to share body warmth. I can't tell you how freaked out I got in those moments. Sure, a hug is supposed to be innocent, but by some random stranger you've never met? The smell of cigarettes and body odor wasn't helping, but that was the least of my concerns as I start to squirm my way out of his embrace. What he tells me in those moments made chills run down my spine. If you try running away, I'm going to stab you. I remember letting out a nervous laughter as he then tries to hug me again. At that point, I had stood up and started to back away from him, now revealing my pepper spray. I know what you might be thinking. Why not just run? Sure, I could have done that, but thank God that I noticed just a mere seconds after I stood up, the bus is turning the corner and it's approaching both myself and this random stranger. Suddenly, it's like this realization pops in this freak's head, because he just gets up, and then he starts to run back in which the way he came from. That wasn't before exclaiming, "You haven't seen the last of me." I'm not ashamed to say that I was shaking very hard, and I did my best to fight back tears while the bus driver starts to ask me if everything was okay. After all, I wasn't budging whatsoever, and I was standing there with my pepper spray in one hand and a couple of dollars in the other. I did finally manage to snap out of my scared mindset and get on the bus, as I gave a quick explanation that the man said he was going to stab me. The bus driver took everything I said seriously and immediately locked the doors and got a move on. Anyway, at the end of the day, I did end up reporting the incident to both campus police as well as our own city's police department, but they never did catch the guy, which is really crazy. Was it possible that he might have been bluffing that evening? Yes, that is very possible. Was his hugging necessary? I think we all know the answer to that. No, it wasn't. Please, I ask people out there, and this goes for both male and female, don't go giving people a hard time and start to follow them. Get a hint, and if that doesn't work, then at least don't try hugging or even touching the person. Could I have done things differently? Absolutely I could have, but it's a lesson and an experience you learn from, and you make sure not to never repeat it again. By the way, I did make it back home safely that evening. However, I did have my dad pick me up at the bus station. So that was the last story for today's episode. If this was the first time you joined us, then do consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. That way you'll be notified of all the future uploads coming here to the channel. Also, make sure to leave a like rating if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment telling me what you all thought. Also, if you yourself have a scary story that you'd like to share, then send it in with my user submissions email, which appears on screen on my videos. tcfnarrations@gmail.com. Now, if you're looking for more of the Creepy Fox, then check out all the other videos I got on my channel. There's so much narration content that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. I've also got some exclusive Scary Stories narration episodes. If you'd like to listen to those, then for as little as $2 a month, you can become a Creepy Fox channel member and gain access to 10 plus hours of extra additional content. I also got some cool merch which is featured down below. There's shirts, stickers, sweaters, coffee mugs, you name it. I got a lot of things that you might like, so check it out, see if you might find something on the Creepy Fox shop. Anyway, that is gonna go ahead and do it for today. Thank you so much everyone for watching today, and I'll go ahead and catch you all on the next episode. Until then, take care and have yourself an amazing day.